If it's happening, we're talking about it on Britain's newsroom.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christys, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christys, on GB News and GB News Radio.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's 3 p.m, it's Patrick Christys here from the Conservative Party conference in Manchester, and I've got an absolutely stellar hour coming your way. Priti Patel, the former Home Secretary, joins me at the top, teeing up the speech from the current Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, who has just walked through these doors here into the conference centre. We also have an interview with Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister. Christopher Hope, our political editor, has got some great lines of him out of that. Even a potential vote in the House of Commons on net zero. What will that really mean? Oh yes, and he's left the door open, the Prime Minister, for Nigel Farage to rejoin the Conservative Party. I've got an hour stacked full of top-name MPs and top topics as well. Come and join me. Yes, get the popcorn ready because it's me, Patrick Christys, here at Conservative Party conference in Manchester, and a little update for you. Nigel Farage is going to be on this show reacting live to Suella Braverman's speech, which is due in about 15, maybe 20 minutes. So it's all to play for here. I will be with you after your headlines.
Good afternoon to you. It's 3 o'clock. I'm Aaron Armstrong in the GB newsroom. Battle lines are being drawn with the Prime Minister telling GB News he's the person to deliver change to Britain. Rishi Sunak has also defended his record on illegal immigration, saying for the first time ever, the number of small boats crossing the channels is down by a fifth. He also reiterated his plan to halve inflation and accused the Labour leader of being weak on his policies.
You've got Keir Starmer, who, no one knows what he stands for, flip-flops left and right. The country can see through that. That's not leadership. What I'm offering is different. I know people want change. I'm the person to deliver it because we're going to do politics differently. You saw that on net zero. You'll see that this week. That's what you get from a Conservative government.
And on the subject of stopping the boats, one of the Prime Minister's 5 priorities, the latest figures show more than 25,000 people have been intercepted crossing the Channel this year. This time last year, the number was 33,000. And it comes as the Home Secretary criticised some immigrants for not embracing British values. At an event in Bolton, Suella Braverman said many who come to live in the UK are failing to learn English and are living parallel lives to the rest of the country. She added it is her job to be fearless in calling that out.
We have a great multi-ethnic society, and in many parts of our country integration has worked. But there are also many towns and cities around the United Kingdom where it hasn't. And communities are living parallel lives. They are coming from abroad, they are not learning the language, they're not embracing British values, and they're not taking part in British life. And that needs to be identified. We need to be fearless in calling that out, and that's my job.
Meanwhile, the Prime Minister is yet to confirm the government's position on the future of the northern leg of HS2. Businesses are demanding immediate clarity following reports Rishi Sunak is planning to scrap the line from Birmingham to Manchester. It's understood the Prime Minister, though, will soften the blow by announcing spending on other infrastructure projects for the north in a speech tomorrow. Trans women could be prevented from using female-only hospital wards. Under new government plans, trans patients would be treated in separate accommodation, which the campaign group Stonewall says will be humiliating and dangerous. Health Secretary Steve Barclay outlined the proposal at the conference earlier.
We will change the NHS constitution following a consultation later this year to make sure we respect the privacy, dignity and safety of all patients, recognise the importance of different biological needs and protect the rights of women.
Junior doctors have threatened further industrial action in November and December unless they receive a credible pay offer. They've been demonstrating outside the conference centre in Manchester alongside consultants on day one of a 3-day strike. Radiographers have also walked out for 24 hours. The BMA are demanding a return to the negotiating table. The government says this year's 6% pay rise is final. Murderers who carry out sexually motivated attacks will automatically face a whole life sentence under new powers. The legal expectation on judges will apply retrospectively to those who've already been charged with the crime but are yet to be sentenced. Justice Secretary Alex Chalk says for the most dangerous and depraved killers, life should really mean life. A 13-year-old boy has admitted killing his grandmother in Sheffield. Marcia Grant died when the child who was driving her car hit her with the vehicle. The boy, who can't be named for legal reasons, was 12 at the time. He will be sentenced in December after pleading guilty to causing death by dangerous driving. A 12-year-old boy is in a critical condition after being struck by lightning in Hertfordshire. It happened during a football tournament at the Seal School in Hertford yesterday. A man in his 50s was also hit. Lightning also struck a recycling plant in Oxfordshire, causing a huge fire. A fireball lit up the sky when a gas tank exploded at a food processing plant in Cassington yesterday. Firefighters tackling the blaze have been monitoring the site this morning. No injuries have been reported. Donald Trump's arrived for the second day of his fraud trial in New York. The former president's accused of inflating the value of his assets by billions of dollars in order to secure better loans and insurance terms. If found guilty, he could face a permanent ban from running businesses in New York and a large fine. Trump has called the trial a sham and has denied any wrongdoing. And the Prince and Princess of Wales are in Cardiff to meet members of the Windrush generation. Prince William and Princess Catherine were greeted by cheering school children as they arrived for an event marking the start of Black History Month. The couple will meet Windrush organisations to hear about their contribution to the Welsh community. This is GB News across the UK. We're on TV, on digital radio and on your smart speaker too. Now it's back over to Patrick at the Conservative Party conference.
Welcome along. Now, there is not long to go until one of the biggest events of the Tory conference. Of course, we will bring you the current Home Secretary, Suella Braverman's speech live on GB News in just a few moments' time. But we do start with our interview with Prime Minister Rishi Sunak. Now, he has told GB News' political editor, Christopher Hope, that his plan to tackle the migrant crisis is working. The number of migrants who have come across the Channel in 2023 has fallen by 25% compared to this time last year.
They're down because of all the things we're doing. The new deal I signed with Albania. We've returned almost 3,000 illegal migrants to Albania, and you know what? They've stopped coming. That's why we need to get Rwanda up and running. Now, I am confident that the plans we've got in place will work. They will deliver. They've got a lot to do. Of course we've got a lot to do, but this is a huge priority for me, and we're making a difference.
Well, we've got some great exclusive lines out of the Prime Minister as well, because he also spoke about his decision to water down the government's net zero policies. And he told us that he's being honest, unlike some politicians in the past.
One of the things I pointed out in my new approach to net zero is we've got to be more transparency around that when that vote happens again in the future. So when I said very clearly, when MPs vote on the amount of carbon reduction that we're going to do, alongside that, they should be considering all the measures that are required to deliver that carbon reduction. That's the kind of honesty and transparency that politicians should have with the country. I didn't like this kind of Westminster consensus, that all this stuff was being cooked up over here. People weren't being open with the country about what was required. I wanted to change that. And look, and as you could see, there were people who criticised me for the decision I made, but I'm going to do what I believe is right for the long term of this country. I'm not going to take the easy way out.
Well, arguably the biggest story out of this now is that the Parliament could genuinely get a vote on some elements of net zero. What will this mean? Is it a political masterstroke from the Prime Minister? Is it not going to be? We'll have to wait and see. Like I said, we're going to have Suella Braverman's speech to take to you very, very shortly. Nigel Farage will be hot-footing it into this studio from that speech. After that, the Justice Secretary has piped up today as well, talking about whole-life tariffs for people retrospectively. Does that even work under the law? But I am joined by the man who was speaking to the Prime Minister, Christopher Hope, and who else? The former Home Secretary, Priti Patel. It's a wonderful way to kickstart the show. But before we talk to them, let's just have a quick look. She's going to kill me for this. What I am. Up to last night?
Patrick.
Oh, you all right?
I am, thank you very much, and thank you for showing that clip. By the way, folks, I was literally there for around 15 minutes.
You were. No, it was an in and out job, I must say. I was there, I can verify
and
that.
Thank you for hosting such a wonderful party.
That's right, the GB
it's very
News
nice
party.
to see everyone, and well done, well done.
No, thank you very much for your support, and of course it was the GB News party, which was a rip-roaring success. But anyway, back to more important matters facing the country, facing this conference. Look, Christopher, I'll start with you. So you sat down with the Prime Minister, you got a couple of really big lines out of him, and of course we're gearing up for this speech from the Home Secretary. So set the scene.
So he was saying, our big thing now is to ask about this issue of net zero, the target of cutting emissions to net zero by 2050. I'm always been troubled. There's never been a single vote of MPs on this. It was pushed into Parliament in June 2019 by the Prime Minister Theresa May. Just last week, when the PM watered down the targets of abandoning new petrol diesel cars by 2035, 2035, he said there's a concern about a lack of consent of the British people. And the issue of consent is so interesting. I said to him, will I do a referendum? He said no, but he did say in this interview he would give a vote to all MPs about whether they would support the watering down of the commitment. And I think going to election, that's a real big moment. It allows Tories to show Labour MPs voting to keep the ban at 2030, whereas the Tory party will give you 5 more years to deal with your issues and your boiler. I mean, Priti Patel, you're a big politician. You know how it works. It's quite a clever idea here.
So it is, and it's sensible. We're a year out potentially from a general election. These become the dividing lines, don't they? You know, how you take the challenge to your opponents and your oppositions. You know, are you on the side of the British public? Are you going to hammer them with more taxes on green initiatives? Or are you going to support our initiative, which is actually to put a moratorium, pause all of this, and vote for it in Parliament? These are the type of parliamentary tactics that we use. I suspect we might use them more frequently.
Are you surprised to see that your PM be a bit more political? Because until now, he's been pretty boring for press covering
Chopper,
politics.
I mean, I'm very candid about this. You know, I want us to win the next election, and we need substance and policies and approaches. It's about deliveries. It's all about the delivery. And a vote in Parliament will demonstrate we're changing the legislation. So actually we can go to the public next year in the general election and say, we are the ones that led this and voted this through Parliament.
There was one question I asked him there. At the weekend, 3 of your colleagues in Cabinet said that leaving the ECHR was on the table. That, to me, is the agreed line from 10 Downing Street. I asked that question of the Prime Minister. He wouldn't go there. He merely talked more about small boats. Is that a mistake?
So, I mean, look, it's not straightforward. We've discussed this many times before. Everyone says just leave.
What do you think?
There's endless mission creep from the European Court in Strasbourg, and we've seen that. Do you remember the whole prisoner vote?
Yes, I'm old enough for that.
Prisoner voting right issue in 2011, I think it was. David Cameron was very firm on that, and all credit to him. But even they block our ability to remove foreign national offenders. These are murderers and rapists who are not British. You know, the courts block action there, and of course they famously blocked the Rwanda flight as well. I'm a great believer in reform, but there's an opportunity here, Britain post-Brexit, for us to do much more. The next way forward, reform ECHR, perhaps even look at how we can move it out of the decision-making space in our own laws. And I think the public will really welcome that, because currently it feels like the government isn't in control. And I can say this because I've been there, when you've got judgments or, you know, rulings that are outside of our own territories, you know, basically stopping the British government from doing what the British people want it to do.
Yeah, and look, do you want to hear a bit more of that? I mean, we're obviously going to be taking a speech very shortly anyway in the conference room behind me. Nigel Farage is going to be reacting off the back of what Suella Braverman has to say. But this kind of stuff, presumably, is what you want to hear. It's what Tory party members want to hear.
It's about delivery. I mean, you know, I do go on about this a hell of a lot. It's about delivering for the British people. And the public will be tired of, you know, seeing a lot of politicking, you know, speeches. It's a political conference. They're going to hear speeches. But they want to know, right, I've heard this from the Prime Minister today. I've heard X from so-and-so and so-and-so. What does that mean? Is something going to change? Votes in Parliament are important. I think this will be reinforced by the King's speech, His Majesty's speech in November as well, where you'll see that programme of work potentially come together, which can absolutely help catalyse a good, solid Conservative message and proposition as we go into the next election.
Yeah, absolutely.
We asked the PM in this interview about, well, small boats. He said it's down by a fifth because of the deal with Albania. Is that enough? I mean, Rwanda was your idea. It's in the courts now.
Sure.
Is Suella Braverman doing enough on small boats?
So it's a collective position. You know, it's not down to one individual at all. The whole of government. We used to have an illegal migration task force across the whole of government to work on this. I worked with the MOD, Ben Wallace at the time. The government has said it's going to stop the boats. And actually, I think they're going to have to explain that in its entirety. What are the key policies that will lead to stopping the boats? The crucial thing, though, people are still crossing, and it's still putting all the pressures on our systems domestically. And actually, you know, we've got the Supreme Court judgment that's coming up next week, I think it could be, or the week after.
It starts next week, in November. It starts
next week, around the Rwanda flights.
Can I ask how you would feel about turning boats back?
So we have already tried that. So I can tell you now, I've been there, you know, many times.
Could you actually talk to us a little bit about that process? Because I know that was something that you were involved with.
It's very controversial and it's not straightforward. So the French absolutely resist the whole concept and the principle of turning boats back. That would also mean entering French territorial waters. British vessels entering French territorial waters. French entered our territorial waters. We wouldn't take too kindly to that for obvious reasons. So we tried to work in partnership, and our approach, working with the MOD, so with Ben Wallace as Defence Secretary back then, was to bring in the Navy, bring in Navy personnel to work with Border Force officials to actually try and look at the turn-back process. But it is controversial because you risk lives being lost at sea. It's very, very difficult, and not everybody agrees with this as well. And as I've said, the French fundamentally disagree with turning boats back, full stop, and sending them back to France. This is the whole thing. They do not want them once they leave. And then you could argue, and you'll know what I'm about to say now. Once they leave France, the French think, well, that's now your problem, Brit. You know, we're not going to take them back, type thing. So there's a lot of toing and froing on that.
Yeah, exactly.
When you were there before Suella Braverman in the Home Office, did you feel all your efforts were being thwarted by officials? We hear a lot about the blob and civil servants stopping you doing stuff because we know how much you believe in it.
Yeah. I mean, I can candidly say it wasn't like that, because all credit to Boris Johnson, he basically said this is not just a Home Office issue. The whole of government has to get behind this. So we had an illegal migration task force. Every member of the cabinet had a role to play, even the Chancellor at the time.
Were you backed by your officials?
Our officials did work to me, there's no doubt about that. Rwanda would not have happened without the support of my officials. We had to go there, do country profiling, you know, negotiate with the government of Rwanda. And because of my past role in DFID as well, I understood all the issues with UN conventions and things of that nature. So they supported me on that. The real challenge is around getting the flights going to Rwanda now, but actually it's still more than that. What can we practically do to either stop the boats or go upstream and actually have the interventions to stop the people smugglers? And our focus should always be going after the gangs, going after the evil people smugglers, because they're the ones that are perpetrating these crimes.
Do you think there's a bit of pearl clutching going on about Rwanda? Because I've got a sneaky suspicion that if it works for us, other countries will do something very similar.
So, this is well documented and it's already public. Denmark were also looking to negotiate with Rwanda. At the same time, we were having discussions with Rwanda. And I think I've read that Germany more recently, and there are other countries that are looking to negotiate as well.
The PM in his interview with us did say we are world leading and other countries are following this example.
So it is correct. And what's interesting, I do know what's going on in Rwanda. They themselves, the governments, have actually been welcoming refugees from Afghanistan more recently, women, girls. And also we know about the conflict in Sudan. So they've taken the medical students who've been displaced in Sudan and now they're educating and training them and they're resettled in Rwanda. And the key thing about the Rwanda policy was it was absolutely designed to raise the bar when it came to global resettlement. It's not a punishment. We should be clear about that. We are investing in people to resettle in Rwanda, to be reskilled, retrained. We've got plenty of case studies actually of people of other nationalities that have resettled in Rwanda who've actually gone on to become entrepreneurs and business leaders and things of that nature. And I think it's about time the debate went higher, not low, and literally we had that discussion about how do we resettle people in a humane way so they can rebuild their lives.
Yeah, indeed. There's a lot of talk today at a think tank around the corner from here about foreign aid. And I wonder if this ties in a bit. You talked about doing things upstream, OK? So how does that marry up with, I think, a desire from a lot of people at this conference, and dare I say maybe the wider public as well, to cut foreign aid? How would that work?
So it doesn't, to be quite candid. Look at the state of the world. You know, we see parts of the world where there are global migration issues, climate change issues. Quite frankly, a lot of persecution is taking place, and we cannot be tone deaf to that at all. If you look even in Africa, the Sahel, you know, we've seen all sorts of uprisings as well. You know, even places like DRC, parts of Africa have had some really troubled times. There's a flight of people when there's destabilisation. Now, with the aid budget, we fundamentally believe in investing in those countries and actually rebuilding governments and the foundations for democracy and their institutions. The thing is, though, on the upstream piece, particularly people smugglers, we know through our intelligence networks which countries are really at the forefront of, you know, forged documents, for example.
What are they? What are you able to say?
So they tend to be around the Middle East.
Right.
So there are a lot of countries. Afghanistan has recently been used as a route, as we know, for example, and that's understandable. But then you still have people coming in through the Mediterranean, Turkey. There are some Middle Eastern countries, which I'm not going to name, that are obviously part of the networks, but are obviously being watched by the intelligence services as well. And there's lots of information and cooperation that takes place in those countries too, which is really important. That is the upstream work that we need, but they need to be able to take the legal interventions to smash the gangs there, so we don't have the repercussions, you know, in Europe. By the time these people come to Europe, it's just too late.
Yeah, exactly.
But you're here, Principal Patel, with all you're talking about security. But why are you? And why were you with Nigel Farage last night? Is it time he rejoined the Tory party?
Well, that's a matter for Nigel, it really is. People know...
Would you allow him in if you were leader?
Well, I'm not leader, and it's public record that Nigel and I, because of our, you know, campaigns on Brexit and everything else, we go back. We absolutely go back, and we've shared platforms when it comes up to stand up for Britain post-Brexit, etc. And I suspect we'll continue to do the same and have many of those discussions on GB News.
Indeed, Christopher, you were interviewing the Prime Minister earlier on, weren't you? And you were a bit cheeky with one of the questions. You asked him, didn't you, about Nigel?
Yeah, that's why I asked him at the end of the question, would you like Mr Farage, who's back here for the first time in weeks, to join?
Let me just crack on, because we're going to go now to the current Home Secretary, Braven, who is talking at the Conservative Party conference in Manchester. She's taking to the stage any moment now, and we'll be hearing from her. People obviously are applauding her. I think we can go to it now. It looks like she's about to start talking. That's Braven at the Conservative Party conference.
Good to see you. Let me start, ladies and gentlemen, by thanking a few people. First of all, my brilliant ministerial team. They're here. Chris Philp, Robert Jenrick, Tom Tugendhat, Sarah Dines, Simon Murray, Andrew Sharp, and my parliamentary team, James Sunderland, Sean Bailey, Kieran Mullen, Scott Mann, and Byron Davies. Thank you for your fantastic work. I'd also like to thank all the Home Office civil servants who work flat out to keep this country safe, and of course, the Greater Manchester Police and all the officers from around the country who are doing their duty here. Now, I don't know if you've noticed, but as Home Secretary, I do occasionally receive a modicum of criticism. Sometimes I'm asked if I ever read what my critics say about me. Well, the answer is yes, I do. I'm made of strong stuff, so I'm prepared to wade through the personal abuse, the wild invective, and the willful misrepresentation. Because I believe that all of us should strive for improvement. And if we close our ears to anyone who disagrees with us, we're less likely to identify our mistakes. One of the reasons why the Conservative Party has survived and thrived for so long is because we are not afraid to admit when we get it wrong and adapt accordingly. We listen, we learn, and we renew ourselves. And that's what we're doing here this week in Manchester. We're raising our game. Because next year, this country will face a clear choice at the general election. Who do people trust to deliver the change that Britain needs? Because there are huge challenges ahead. The world is being transformed by powerful forces. And I think the British people see that, perhaps more clearly than some of those in Westminster who live in the bubble of complacency. I also think most British people have a pretty good sense of how they expect their government to respond to those challenges. And I'm confident that when push comes to shove, the voters will realise that they are much more likely to get the change they really want from Rishi Sunak and the Conservatives than from any of the left-wing parties. And the reason is simple. And I'll explain it with an example from my responsibilities as Home Secretary. Now, one of the most powerful forces reshaping our world is unprecedented mass migration. The wind of change that carried my own parents across the globe in the 20th century was a mere gust compared to the hurricane that is coming. Because today, the option of moving from a poorer country to a richer one is not just a dream for billions of people. It is an entirely realistic prospect. Every human, every single person has the right to aspire to a better life. As Conservatives, that's one of the cornerstones of our philosophy. Indeed, without that dream, I wouldn't be standing before you today. But Conservatives are also practical and realistic. Nobody can deny that there are far, far more people in poorer countries who would love to move to Britain than could ever be accommodated. Even if we concreted over the countryside, turned our cities into one vast building site and erected skyscrapers from Eastbourne to Elgin, from Hull to Holyhead, it still wouldn't be enough. Demand will always outstrip supply. I know it, you know it, and the voters know it. This country has been generous in taking in refugees from Afghanistan, from Ukraine, from Syria, from Hong Kong. The decency of the British people cannot be questioned. But they also care deeply about overall numbers. In poll after poll, the British people have been clear. Immigration is already too high. And they know another thing, that the future could bring millions more migrants to these shores, uncontrolled and unmanageable, unless the government they elect next year acts decisively to stop that happening. And we are the only party that will take effective action. Now, I can't pretend that politicians have done a great job of managing immigration for the last 30 years. We were too slow to recognise the scale of the problem, too unwilling to accept that our legal framework needed to be updated. And let's be honest, far too squeamish about being smeared as racist to properly bring order to the chaos. But under Rishi Sunak's leadership, things are changing. We are raising our game. For years, too many overseas students were bringing their dependents here to the UK. So we've changed the rules to ensure that a student visa is not a route for whole families to come and live and work in the UK. When I stood before you at conference last year, we were dealing with a surge of Albanian illegal migrants coming on small boats, over 12,000 in 2022 alone. Fast forward a year, and thanks to the returns deal with Albania that we put in place and changes that we made to our rules, those numbers are now down by 90%. Indeed, against a backdrop of increasing illegal migration into Europe, small boat crossings to the UK are down by 20% compared to last year. And, conference, we will soon begin closing down asylum hotels. That is not nearly enough. I accept that. But it is a start. And it's a hell of a lot more than Labour would do. I said at conference last year that we had to change our laws, and we did. Our Illegal Migration Act, which will come into force in the coming months, now means that the only route to asylum in the UK is a legal route. The Act means that those arriving illegally will be detained and removed back to their home country if possible, or to a safe third country like Rwanda. But all of this is ultimately a question of political will. And be under no illusion, we will do whatever it takes to stop the boats and deter bogus asylum seekers. We will also ensure that legal migration comes down to reasonable levels, and that it occurs only when there is a clear benefit to the British people. That's our pledge, that's our plan, and I believe the public will back it. Because everyone knows what Labour will do on migration. Labour will do what Labour always does: open our borders. At heart, Labour doesn't believe that we have the right to keep people out. Sure, they may mouth a bit of occasional rhetoric about controlling our borders, but that's not what the Labour Party has ever done in government. And it's not just negligence or incompetence, although you can be guaranteed of plenty of that if Labour wins. It's actually deliberate. The biggest reason why Conservative governments have struggled to get illegal migration under control is because Labour governments passed laws that inhibit effective action. Because the truth is, we struggle to remove foreign criminals. We struggle to get accurate data on the ages of the asylum seekers. We struggle even to confiscate their phones when they arrive on our beaches. Let me tell you, our country has become enmeshed in a dense net of international rules that were designed for another era. And it is Labour that turbocharged their impact by passing the misnamed Human Rights Act. I'm surprised they didn't call it the Criminal Rights Act. Because I tell you, every time I've gone to Parliament to improve the law on immigration, Labour has tried to block us, always aided by their allies in the third sector, some of whom openly declare that they oppose national borders merely on principle. All of them bleating the same incessant accusation: racist, racist, racist. They've always used that smear. They tried it against Margaret Thatcher. It didn't work. They tried it against David Cameron. It didn't work. A couple of years ago, they even tried it against Winston Churchill, our greatest ever leader, and it didn't even work then. And I can promise you, it won't work against Rishi Sunak, and it won't work against me. The truth is, every one of us in this room should be proud of our roots and proud of our conservative values. We believe that Britain has the right to secure borders, to decide who gets into our country and who does not. We are the party to confront the challenge of global migration in the years ahead, not a Labour Party that will open the borders and then cry racism to anyone who objects. So let's be clear. The choice between Conservatives and Labour is the choice between strong borders and no borders. Now, the next election will also be fought on law and order, between a Conservative government that wants the police to focus on criminal justice and a Labour Party that thinks the police should focus on social justice, between a Conservative government that stands up for the police and a Labour Party that wants to see them take the knee, between a Conservative government that wants to help ordinary people go about their lives unimpeded and a Labour Party that sympathises with the eco-idiots that block our roads and stop mums from taking their kids to school, stops workers from getting to their jobs and stops ambulances from getting to hospitals. Because when it comes to Just Stop Oil, Labour's lawyers advise them and Labour's donors fund them. That's exactly why Labour resisted the legislation that we passed to crack down on this madness. Because thanks to our new laws, the police can now get these clowns off our streets and get traffic moving in a matter of minutes. The Prime Minister and I are firmly on the side of the law-abiding majority. That's why we've backed our police officers with one of the largest ever rises in police pay. It's why we ensured we hit our target of 20,000 additional police officers, so that we now have more officers in England and Wales than ever before. It's why we've backed the police's use of stop and search as an effective way to get knives off our streets. It's why we secured agreement from the police to investigate all burglaries and follow all reasonable lines of inquiry when someone reports a crime. And it's why we've reformed hate crime guidance so that officers aren't wasting hours investigating squabbles on Twitter. It's why we're making sure the police are not inadvertently helping mobs to enforce non-existent blasphemy laws. And it's why we've prioritised tracking down grooming gang perpetrators and getting justice for their victims after authorities turned a blind eye. It's why we've made sure that Prevent, the government programme that stops people sliding towards terrorism, is focused on the main security threat to the British public, Islamist extremism. And let me take a moment to recognise that in all of this, we have been assisted by some truly excellent police and crime commissioners who share our commitment to common sense and law and order. There is so much more to do, and the public knows that. But Labour certainly won't do it. There's more to do to reform our vagrancy laws, because we cannot let British cities go the way of San Francisco or Seattle. There's more to do to ensure that foreign national offenders aren't clogging up our prisons for less serious crimes, but are booted out of Britain as soon as possible. There's much more to do to end the scandal of rapists and paedophiles changing their names to evade sanctions and criminal record checks. And so, we will bring forward legislation to prevent registered sex offenders from changing their identities. We will work to strengthen background checks so that they can catch undisclosed changes of identity. Let me tell you something. I don't care if anyone thinks this is interfering with their human rights. It's time to worry less about the rights of sexual predators and more about the rights of victims. I want to thank the Safeguarding Alliance for their tireless campaigning on this issue. And let me go on and say this. I have a particular message to those brave police officers who risk their lives to protect the rest of us by carrying firearms into situations where they could be harmed or even killed. You are the thin blue line. You have our support. We are grateful for the vital work that you do day in, day out. And that's why I announced a review to report to me by the end of the year to ensure that the legal and operational framework in which they operate is robust and commands the confidence of both officers and the public. And to those who ask whether Labour can be trusted to fight crime, I have a two-word answer. Sadiq Khan. If there's any justice in this world, Susan Hall is going to wipe the floor with him in May. They've already started the character assassination against Sue. The distortions, the insults, the lies, because that's what the Labour Party always does. It prefers smears to debate. Now, personally, I take their abuse as a compliment. I know they've tried to make me into a hate figure because I tell the truth, the blunt, unvarnished truth about what is happening in our country. And I know there are some who think that emphasising the importance of law and order or secure borders is unedifying. They look down on those of us who care about such things. Of course, they are entitled to their beliefs. But let's be honest, these are luxury beliefs. What do I mean by that? Our politically correct critics have money, they have status, they have loud voices. They have the luxury of promoting seductive but irresponsible ideas, safe in the knowledge that their privilege will insulate them from any collateral damage. The luxury beliefs brigade sit in their ivory towers telling ordinary people that they are morally deficient because they dare to get upset about the impact of illegal migration, net zero, or habitual criminals. And you can be sure of one thing. People with luxury beliefs will flock to Labour at the next general election because that's the way to get the kind of society they want. What is that? They want, and they like, open borders. The migrants coming in won't be taking their jobs. In fact, they're more likely to have them mowing their lawns or cleaning their homes. They love soft sentences because the criminals who benefit from such ostentatious compassion won't be terrorising their streets or grooming their children. They're desperate to reverse Brexit. They think patriotism is embarrassing and have no use for their British passport unless it's taking them to their second homes in Tuscany or the Dordogne. For these people, I have a simple message. You are entitled to your luxury beliefs, but the British people will no longer pay for them. There's another reason I think we will win the next election. You see, we have a secret weapon. Well, not that secret. Everyone in this hall knows it. I think everyone who'll be at Labour conference knows it too. And our friends in the media definitely know it. Our secret weapon is Sir Keir Starmer. You see, the British people have no enthusiasm for Sir Keir Starmer. They know that he believes in nothing. They know that he will say anything to anyone and then change his mind at the first sign of trouble. Keir Starmer lacks the personality to lead this country effectively. Imagine what would happen if he became Prime Minister. Luxury beliefs would reign supreme. Britain would go properly woke. Things are bad enough already. We see it in parts of Whitehall, in museums, in galleries, in the police, and even in leading companies in the city. Under the banner of diversity, equity, and inclusion, official policies have been embedded that distort the whole purpose of these institutions. Highly controversial ideas are presented to the workforce and to the public as if they're motherhood and apple pie. Gender ideology, white privilege, anti-British history. And the evidence demonstrates that if you don't challenge this poison, things just get worse. Whole institutions become captured. And of course, as always happens when the left gets the upper hand, those who fail to conform are persecuted, chased out of their jobs for saying that a man can't be a woman, scolded for rejecting that they're beneficiaries of institutional racism, disciplined for using the wrong words. This Conservative government has begun the task of clearing out this pernicious nonsense. The British people will get to decide if they want to curb woke with Rishi Sunak or let it run riot with Keir take-the-knee Starmer. Labour is the party of pressure groups, rich zealots and trade union activists. But you know, the Conservative Party is also a kind of trade union. Because we are the trade union of the British people. And I think we should adopt as our motto these lines from the poet Shelley, which I'm shamelessly taking back from Labour. Rise like lions after slumber in unvanquishable number. Shake your chains to earth like dew, which in sleep had fallen on you. You are many, they are few. We stand with the many, the law-abiding, hard-working, common-sense majority, against the few, the privileged woke minority, with their luxury beliefs, who wield influence out of proportion to their numbers. Our message to the people is clear. We are raising our game. We are fighting for a Britain that puts you first. We are on your side. Thank you.
OK, so that was the Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, there, speaking to rapturous applause at the Conservative Party conference in Manchester. I think you may have managed to pick up that it appears as though there was a brief moment of protest, somebody being escorted out after a little bit of shouting. Our political editor, Christopher Hope, has gone to check out exactly what happened there. He will report back shortly. I'm going to summarise very quickly what Suella Braverman had to say there. She said that Britain has been generous to migrants, asylum seekers. She says that we need to stop bogus asylum claims. She also said that Labour will be much worse. She was at pains to say that. She also was very strong, saying that Labour has essentially deliberately rigged the migration system and the illegal migration system in order to allow people in. She said that the Human Rights Act should be renamed the Criminal Rights Act, that Labour will vote against everything they tried to do. She moved forward then from migration to talk about justice. She said that Just Stop Oil are funding the Labour Party and that they are backing them up, and that actually under Labour you get social justice, not strong justice. She spoke about the work that the Conservatives have done to tackle grooming gangs and to fight Islamist terrorism. She was at pains again to say that is the most prevalent form of extremism that we face. She also said that registered sex offenders should not be allowed to change their name and gender. That got quite a lot of applause in the conference hall as well. She says that it's time to worry less about the human rights of sexual offenders like rapists and paedophiles and more about the human rights of the rest of us. And one last one for you as well. She was very strong, saying that a lot of people have what she called luxury beliefs. She called them the luxury belief brigade. These are the people who have lofty ideas but aren't actually impacted by the real world impact of their ideology, such as open borders, etc. Now, without further dither and delay, I am joined by the man himself. Yes, that's right, Matt Vickers, MP. Thank you very much. You've been sitting there throughout all of that. Let's start with the immigration asylum issue first. She was saying that the Conservative Party are strong borders and the Labour Party are no borders. Is she being a bit OTT there? Not massively strong borders at the minute, are you?
A few years ago, we had this slogan about it, and it was something about, are you thinking what we're thinking? Do you know what? When I'm on the doorsteps in Stockton, this is a top issue, and the people of Stockton are thinking exactly what Suella was saying. And they're not thinking it because they're racist. They're thinking it because they're concerned about the security of the country. They're thinking about the huge cost to the country of housing so many people in hotels, etc., etc. It's a really big issue for the country. And I think what Suella was talking about there made a lot of sense. And actually, there is a big wedge issue there in that the Labour Party have opposed every effort to make our borders more secure. They've opposed everything we've brought forward. And the consequences are huge for the country. But moreover, if we can get the Rwanda deal across the line, we're going to see it in the courts in the very near future for the final time, hopefully, and we can start putting that deterrent in place, it's going to make a big change.
Look, what she was really stressing heavily throughout that speech was things are going to be so much worse under Labour, they don't actually want to do anything. Is that all you've got now? Look, it's not great with us, but it'll be much worse with that lot.
No, I don't think at all. I think actually what we're doing is the right thing, because if you look at Albania, we've got a scheme in place now where if you arrive in this country from Albania, you are going back to where you came from. And it's working because the number of people coming from Albania is down 90%. So if we can get the Rwanda deal across the line, get it through the courts, get it through past these lefty lawyers, which is hopefully going to happen very, very soon, and people know that when they arrive in this country, they are going to be detained and they will be returned. That's what we've got to do. It's took way too long to do it, but if we can get it across the line, it's going to be a game changer.
OK, all right. So those are your views. I believe I might be able to bring in John McTernan now, who is a former advisor to Tony Blair. I'm getting it in my ear as well that I've got Stephen Pound, former Labour MP. I was John McTernan first, though. There we go. John, good to see you. Look, Suella Braverman was basically blaming you for the state of the country, saying that you have deliberately rigged it. The Human Rights Act should be called the Criminal Rights Act, and that the Labour Party, well, essentially want criminals and illegal immigrants here for some reason. Your thoughts?
I thought she was making a leadership speech and contesting with Nigel Farage to be the next leader of the Tory party. It's the most ludicrous speech I think I've seen, one which failed to address her own record. In the last 4 days, over 1,000 refugees have arrived on our shores in small boats. She says her policy for that is that those people are going to be detained and deported. She doesn't have a Rwanda policy. If the Rwanda policy is eventually proves to be lawful, there's only, 180, 200 places there? She doesn't have any plan at all, apart, of course, from attacking the Labour Party. And as you said...
Is she right, though, John, to say that things will be worse under the Labour Party? I mean, they might be bad now, but surely it will be worse under Labour, no?
Every word in that speech, including and thee, were a lie. Of course it'll be better under the Labour Party. Labour can do a deal with France to do processing in France, and then you can actually return people from France to the countries they came from if they don't get the right to come to Britain. Labour can do a deal with Europe and Europol to actually have a country that can be trusted under Keir Starmer Prime Ministership can actually do deals with Europe, and that's much more effective. What we got there was the invention of lie after lie after lie. Labour doesn't believe in open borders. Labour, in the last Labour government, regularly deported far more people whose claims failed back to the country that they came from. So, we can stand on our record as a Labour government. It's clear. Suella Braverman doesn't believe you can stand on the record.
That's interesting. Okay. All right, I'll go back to you. That's interesting, Matt. What John's saying there is the Labour government can stand on their record when it comes to immigration. He was saying that Labour, apparently, magically, can do a deal with Europol and with the French in a way that the Tories can't. Is he right?
I think the UK needs to determine who's coming to this country, not Brussels. And I think any sort of deal has to be a loser if you're taking your share of the EU's migrants. But moreover, in terms of record, Keir Starmer and his Labour Party have voted against every single measure we put forward to toughen up our immigration system. They've campaigned against the deportation of foreign criminals. They've voted against tougher sentences for people smugglers. Yes, these evil people who put people in a boat and profit on the back of it. They've voted against tougher sentencing for those people. It's completely out of kilter, and it will be the big dividing line when this election comes.
I'm going to bring in Stephen Pound now, if I can, former Labour MP. OK, and Stephen, I will put that to you, which is actually the Labour record isn't particularly good. In fact, they have, as Matt was saying there, actively voted against pretty much everything that could control what's going on in the Channel. So, I mean, she's got a point, doesn't she, Suella?
No, she doesn't. Patrick, that's completely wrong. Look, I have to say, I ran out of counting the pork pies in this speech of hers. I mean, the idea that basically she was trashing the Conservative government for the last 13 years. She was saying Whitehall's being taken over by these monstrous Hydra-headed woke whatever it is, this great wild beast, who's been in power for the last 13 years. Is she saying that the Tories have got no authority, no ability? Because if they can't get it right in 13 years, how in the name of all that's holy can they be expected to get it right in the next 5 years? I'm sorry. And as for all this nonsense, you know, that we've been coming out about taxes on meat and flying and everything, this is absolute desperation. What I'm not hearing, Patrick, I think, is anything that's actually saying to the country, this is what we're going to do to make you feel better. This is what we're going to do about energy security. This is what we're going to do about the cost of living. We're not going to do about the health service, about housing. I'm not hearing that.
I do get that, Stephen, but to be fair, you didn't hear that because she's the Home Secretary, right? I mean, it'd be weird if she started talking about wind turbines, wouldn't it? I mean, that's not what she was there to do.
She should be talking about law and order. I heard nothing about the police, nothing about the fear that, in our streets, the horrors that most of the people I used to represent face. Yeah.
OK, all right, Stephen, I'll just bring Matt back in now, because actually she did talk about the police. OK, she did praise the Police and Crime Commissioner. She called Keir Starmer, Keir takes the knee Starmer, which was, you know, pretty strong. She says that she wants law and order, whereas, proper justice, she said, whereas under Labour you would just get social justice. I suppose she's trying to say there that really you do care about things like violent crime and knife crime.
Well, we actually saw announced amongst that lot was whole life sentences for some of the most heinous, violent sexual crimes. Moving forwards, toughening up on sentencing.
Carry on.
Toughening up on sentencing is fundamental, but moreover, we talked about, you know, the party of protest, the party that is not only thinks it's acceptable for these people to glue themselves to the road and cause absolute chaos for anybody who wants to get on with their lives, but actually is selling off their policies on that front. They're going to stop us giving out licences for British oil and gas. They want us to import it from abroad, costing us jobs, costing our economy and making things miserable.
All right, Matt, I will leave it there with you and release you from your duties, and I am about to go, I think, toe-to-toe with John McTernan and Stephen Pound, if possible. John, I'll bring you back in, John McTernan, former advisor to Tony Blair. Let's talk about a couple of the other things that Suella Braverman mentioned there, which is about registered sex offenders. They're going to stop them from being able to change their name and gender and basically mask their identity and then clearly potentially find it easier to go on and commit the most heinous crimes. I've got to be honest with you, John, I did wonder why on earth that hadn't been done already.
Well, if you listen to the footnote she put into her speech, where she sort of said, we need to find better ways to enforce the criminal checks. And she was actually acknowledging that if people choose to misrepresent who they are, you have to have a process for checking who they are. And she didn't really have an answer to it. She wants to issue a ban. OK, she can say that. She can say it in Parliament, say it in Manchester, say it on a train, whatever she wants to do. She didn't indicate there was any mechanism she knew of to actually stop people misrepresenting who they are. And, you know, fraud is probably one of the biggest areas of crime that's exploded in the last few years. And there's not really a coherent strategy from the government or the police service to do anything about it.
Look, with absolute... Yeah, I am just going to cut across you there just because we've got a little bit of a... potential scoop, I think, from our political editor, Christopher Hope, who you might have seen that there was a little bit of a protest that took place during Suella Braverman's speech there, OK? And Chopper saw it and legged it over. And I believe, Christopher, that you had a little bit of an interaction with the protester. Is that right?
That's right. I've just been with him. I literally sprinted from this studio here with you, Patrick, to go and find him.
Yeah.
I've interviewed him on my mobile phone. It's going to air on GB News imminently. He says he's Andrew Boff.
OK.
He's a member of the London Assembly. He's a Tory elected a member of the London Assembly who was shouting there about Suella Braverman. It's deeply embarrassing. The last time this ever happened in a party conference, I was there when it was a comedian gave a P45 statement to Theresa May. I've never known an elected member of the London Assembly to heckle Suella Braverman, the Home Secretary. This is a disaster for the Tory party.
Right, OK, and you've got the footage of that, which we're going to air shortly.
It's airing shortly. It's been cut now by our team here in Manchester. OK,
right, interesting stuff. Thank you very much, Christopher. And look, thank you very much there to John McTernan as well as Stephen Pound, a former Labour MP, Stephen Pound. Nigel Farage is hot-footing it on his way from the conference hall to the studio as well. Look, it's obviously going to be an action-packed hour coming your way in just a couple of minutes' time. Don't you dare move. Get the popcorn ready. OK, right, yeah, there we go. I believe that we can go to your headlines now. And like I said, it is going to be a very, very busy hour coming your way. We're going to have footage of that protester speaking exclusively to Christopher Hope, our political editor, and Nigel Farage on the show in just a tick. Stay tuned.
Patrick, thanks very much indeed. Well, the top stories this hour. We're hearing at Conservative Party conference in Manchester that stopping the boats is one of the Prime Minister's 5 priorities. The latest figures show more than 25,000 people have been intercepted crossing the English Channel in small boats so far this year. This time last year, the number was 33,000.
We have a great multi-ethnic society, and in many parts of our country, integration has worked. But there are also many towns and cities around the United Kingdom where it hasn't. And communities are living parallel lives. They are coming from abroad, they are not learning the language, they're not embracing British values, and they're not taking part in British life. And that needs to be identified. We need to be fearless in calling that out, and that's my job.
That was Suella Braverman, the Home Secretary, talking a short time ago in the conference hall in Manchester. Well, battle lines are being drawn. The Prime Minister telling GB News he's the person to deliver change to Britain. Rishi Sunak has also defended his record on illegal immigration, saying for the first time ever, the number of small boats crossing the Channel is down by a fifth. He's also reiterated his plan to halve inflation and accused the Labour leader of being weak on his policies.
You've got Keir Starmer, who, no one knows what he stands for, flip-flops left and right. The country can see through that. That's not leadership. What I'm offering is different. I know people want change. I'm the person to deliver it because we're going to do politics differently. You saw that on net zero. You'll see that this week. That's what you get from a Conservative government.
Meanwhile, the Prime Minister is yet to confirm the government's position on the future of the northern section of the HS2 rail project. Businesses are demanding immediate clarity. Following reports, Rishi Sunak is planning to scrap the line from Birmingham to Manchester. It's understood the Prime Minister will soften the blow by announcing spending on other infrastructure projects in the north in a speech tomorrow. Now, trans people, male to female trans women, could be prevented from using female-only hospital wards. Under new government plans, trans patients would be treated in separate accommodation, which the campaign group Stonewall says will be humiliating and dangerous. The Health Secretary, Steve Barclay, has outlined the proposal at the Conservative Party conference.
We will change the NHS constitution following a consultation later this year to make sure we respect the privacy, dignity and safety of all patients, recognise the importance of different biological needs and protect the rights of women.
Well, away from events in Manchester, junior doctors have threatened further industrial action in November and December unless they receive a credible pay offer. They've been demonstrating outside the conference centre in Manchester alongside consultants on day one of a 3-day strike. Radiographers have also walked out for 24 hours. The BMA are demanding a return to the negotiating table, but the government says this year's 6% pay rise is final. Now, murderers who carry out sexually motivated attacks will automatically face a whole life sentence under new powers. The legal expectation on judges will apply retrospectively to those who've already been charged with the crime but are yet to be sentenced. Justice Secretary Alex Chalk says for the most dangerous and depraved killers, life should really mean life. Now, in news away from home, Donald Trump has called New York's Attorney General corrupt on the second day of his fraud trial in the United States. The former president is accused of inflating the value of his assets by billions of dollars in order to secure better loan and insurance terms. He could face a permanent ban from running businesses in New York and a large fine. He denies any wrongdoing and accused the New York top lawyer Letitia James of being a fraud herself in the courthouse this afternoon.
Judge Engoron has been given false and extremely misleading information about my net worth. Private company, nobody's supposed to know my net worth, but now everybody is and will, and I hope you're impressed. We built a great company. But he's been given false information, misleading information, and corrupt information by a very corrupt and incompetent Attorney General, Letitia James. This woman is grossly incompetent.
Trump speaking their apologies for the low level of sound. We'll get that fixed for you. Now, here, the Prince and Princess of Wales are in Cardiff today to meet members of the Windrush generation. Prince William and Princess Catherine were greeted by cheering school children as they arrive for an event marking the start of Black History Month. The couple will meet Windrush organisations to hear about their contribution to the Welsh community. This is GB News across the UK on TV, in your car, on digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying play GB News. This is Britain's news channel.
Wow, well, it certainly kicked off here at the Conservative Party conference in Manchester. We start with Suella Braverman. She was giving her speech, quite a tub thumper of a speech, covered a load of issues. We'll get stuck into that. But a Tory member of the London Assembly was thrown out of the conference hall after heckling the Home Secretary. Now, before that, Braverman told the Conservative Party conference they will do whatever it takes to stop the boats. She warned that the country faces huge challenges. She says, of course, that the public knows that the Tories are the best party to deal with them. She went on talking about the fact that we do too much as a nation at the moment to stand up for the human rights of criminals. She even mentioned sexual predators. She even mentioned paedophiles, actually, and said that we need to stop protecting the human rights of everybody else, OK? She also said that there is the luxury belief brigade which exists in this country, who have these lofty ideas about things like open borders, but whose lives aren't really touched by the real-world consequences of their own ideology. So the Human Rights Act should be renamed the Criminal Rights Act, and that it would be much worse, she says, under Labour. OK, lots to unpack here. I am joined by GB News' political editor, Christopher Hope, and also the Conservative MP for Mansfield, Ben Bradley. Both of you, thank you very, very much. Christopher, can I just start with you? Because, look, shortly we're going to be having a little bit of video, I think, from this protester. But what happened? You caught up with this guy as he was...
So I was hot-footed it from your stand here to go and find him out there. Interviewed on my mobile phone. We'll see that shortly aired on GB News. He's Andrew Boff, a Tory party member for 50 years. He stood to be the Conservative candidate for London Mayor a while ago, when they're looking for the right candidate a couple of times. He's a man who's respected within the party, certainly within the capital. He was protesting, he says, about what he sees as transphobia in the government policies, and he's wearing, I think it was a rainbow lanyard. So he's concerned about the Home Secretary, the way the Home Office is taking some stand in that point. He's very concerned. I've never, in my time, 20 years covering politics, seen a Conservative elected mayor of an assembly shout at the Home Secretary in such an embarrassing public way.
OK, Ben, before we get stuck into the actual substance of what Suella said, I mean, is she transphobic?
No, I think the government, Suella, are quite rightly putting safeguarding at the forefront of that. It was around prisons and where trans people go in male or female prisons. And we've seen some horrible examples of what happens if that goes wrong and if safeguarding is not at the forefront of that. I don't think it's transphobic to say that biology is really important in that conversation, and we have to protect the rights of women in female prisons, in female spaces. So I think she's spot on. Inevitably, it's a contentious conversation, isn't it? So not surprised. Some people disagree, but I think she's spot on. OK, all right, we will have more on that a little bit later on because we're going to get a bit of video footage. And in fact, I am doing a segment on that very thing later in the show, which is about whether or not somebody who was born biologically male can end up in a woman's prison. One would imagine the same would apply the other way around, although arguably a bit less threatening. Ben, I'll get you on some of the substance now of what she said. She said that we have to stop bogus asylum claims, that the Human Rights Act should be renamed the Criminal Rights Act, that Labour have voted against everything that you guys have tried to do to stop the boats and curb illegal migration, and that we have a choice now between strong borders under the Tories or open borders under Labour. Is that fair? I think so. I think we have been trying really hard for a long time to tackle this issue of illegal migration. I've been on your programme before talking about what that means to our communities. It's not about race, it's not about what country people come from. It's about fairness and the access to public services and the impact that it has on those communities. And I think you were right in your kind of intro earlier on to say it affects some communities really acutely, and other people, it means there's a new interesting restaurant on the corner.
Exactly.
So I think she's spot on to raise it. I think she has consistently in the last few weeks, particularly her immigration speech a few weeks ago, got into these international treaties and this international obligations that we have that consistently seem to prevent us from taking the action we need to take to tackle those border issues, and really important that she's willing to now dig into that and to make changes.
But are you happy with the language being... Even for me, immigration is all about language and how you term it. She described there about unprecedented mass migration, a hurricane. This is language which you want to see the modern-day Tory party use. It's language more of UKIP in the old days, no?
We have to accept this is a really important issue that people really care about. And I think lots of people feel that way, rightly or wrongly. But again, there's always, from the outside, there's a kind of racial overtone that's added to it, which is not actually there in what she ever says. It's entirely about that fairness issue. And if you live, if you rely on public services in particular, you are impacted by the fact, I'm a council leader, right? Increasing amounts of our funding that is meant for vulnerable kids or vulnerable adults is spent on housing illegal migrants, is spent on things that it's not there for.
The one thing that you can't really get around is that this has happened on your watch, hasn't it?
Well, it's a particular COVID issue, isn't it? So people used to come in the back of lorries. Nobody really noticed. We didn't. We looked at it, and there were some tragedies that happened in those circumstances too.
Yeah.
But it became incredibly visible when the lorries weren't coming, and people started to come on small boats. So it's quite a recent issue, and one that we are trying really hard to tackle. I think it's pretty clear what Suella says is right, that we are the only party that's likely to be in government anytime soon that is going to tackle it. But there are these clear barriers, particularly judicial review, particularly international obligations. And I'm really pleased that Suella is saying now, we want to renegotiate those things internationally, but actually we're not going to wait for that. We need to get on and do what we need to do.
Okay, all right. She did also hit on law and order. So it wasn't just all about immigration. She was very strong on law and order. She alluded to the idea of Just Stop Oil being the kind of power behind Labour's potential throne. She said that the Tory party have done a lot to tackle on grooming gangs and that they are focused, laser-like focus, on cracking down on the biggest terror threat, which is the Islamist extremism threat. She said thank you very much to all of the police and crime commissioners that were there. But there is a perception in this country at the moment that law and order has gone to the dogs.
Well, I think we are getting back to a place where we've got more police officers. Certainly in Nottinghamshire, where I'm from, we're back about the same level as we historically ever have been, which is good. I think there's a neighbourhood element to that. I think there's something about priorities and focus that Suella's touching on there, and she talks a lot about people being pulled off in directions that shouldn't necessarily be priorities. And actually, we really need to focus that neighbourhood and that local policing on the crime that affects people, the burglary, the antisocial behaviour, and we've seen crackdown in recent months on things like the antisocial behaviour that blights communities. So I think they're getting to the right place. Government doesn't directly always run the police and set those priorities, so it's not always a straightforward thing for her to tackle. But there's also, it's increasingly complex crime, increasingly online, increasingly that terror side of things we never see as the public because it's managed outside of our sphere.
We don't hear about a lot of
expensive and complicated things.
A lot of the near misses. Yeah, no, that is absolutely fair enough. I'm just going to go now, I think, to this images and the videos that we do have of. So this is a chap who was saying is Andrew Boff, a Conservative Assembly member in London, and he was kicked out of Suella Braverman's speech for heckling her, supposedly over being transphobic. I think we can play this now.
My name's Andrew Boff. I'm a member of the London Assembly and a loyal Tory for 50 years.
So why are you saying that to
trash about gender ideology?
Why are you saying that?
Trash about gender ideology is making our Conservative Party look transphobic and homophobic. This is not what the Conservative Party is about. We have a proud record of standing up for...
But you're a Conservative?
Of course I'm Conservative.
Are you a member of the party now?
Of course I am.
So why are you showing us
to go to the cloakroom? The cloakroom? No, we'll get you...
Now, please, you're going to be leaving the site, please, sir. Your name, sir, is Andrew Boff.
Andrew Boff, and I'm a member of the London Assembly, a member of the party for 50 years and a proud member.
So I'm not going to... shouting at your Home Secretary?
Because she was talking absolute arrant nonsense about gender ideology, about wokeness and all the rest of it. Our party has a proud record of standing up for LGBT plus rights, and she's destroying it. It's time she sorted out her own department rather than giving this trash away.
If you are leaving the site, you'll have to come in immediately. Andrew, why are you saying that, though?
Sorry?
Why are you saying that? Why are you saying that?
Can I have my thing out of the...
Yeah, we'll get that property sorted, sir. Andrew, why are you saying that? Why are you saying that about to Suella Braverman?
Well, because she's scapegoating trans people, gay people, anybody who doesn't fit her model. She's dog whistling, and she's also presiding over a department that's failing dismally in terms of processing asylum seekers.
Thank you,
OK, so that's strong stuff there from Andrew Boff. I will just reiterate a couple of the things he said. He says that Suella Braverman is talking trash about gender ideology. It's making the Conservative Party look transphobic. He accused Suella Braverman of engaging in dog whistle politics, basically that he's ashamed of the Conservative Party. Yeah, Ben, your reaction?
Well, I disagree. I think it's one of those issues, frustratingly, that it is always seemingly so binary, right? And you can't raise concerns or criticise without being accused of those kinds of things. I don't think that's fair or reflects what she said. I think there are a lot of people in this country who are really concerned about this kind of creeping gender conversation, whether that is in prisons and the safeguarding stuff we talked about, whether it's in schools and what we teach our kids. I think it's really important, and it's right that, as the party of government, we tackle important issues.
I've got a line here from the Tory party. I said, any comment on the protester? They say he's not coming back in.
He's not coming back in. What's worth noting there as well is that Christopher Hope got thrown out with him in the process.
Yes, I disappeared without my pass. I couldn't get back in. I was late for your show. All for the GB News viewers, Patrick.
We will let you off. We will definitely let you off. Does it tie in a little bit with what Suella Braverman was also saying? She did mention about gender ideology. She also said about British history being taught correctly to children in schools. She said that several institutions had been captured by a group of people who are the luxury belief brigade or of a certain ideology. Is that true? Have they been captured?
I think it's a minority of places, but I think it is really important to tackle at its root, and whether that is revisionist versions of British history or whether that is the gender conversation. You know, you see some really extreme examples where people do have some independence to teach and deliver things in the way that they want, but actually we would want to reflect as a government and as a country a clear set of British values, and I think that needs to be clearer. I've been one of those.
What are British values?
Well, it's a complicated thing, right, to explain and justify, but what I think on the education is that you need to have a clear set of parameters as to what it is we teach our kids. I've been working with Miriam Cates on the conversation about sexual education in schools and how that has crept and how ideology of different teachers has led to people being taught stuff that is not what's in the biology textbooks, shall we say, and that shouldn't be allowed to happen.
OK, fair enough. Christopher?
What's your take on Andrew Boff? Should he be now thrown out of the party? It's all very well saying leave the conference, but is that appropriate to embarrass the Home Secretary in such a way on the national stage?
Oh, it's not helpful, is it, clearly? But, you know, it's a broad...
He's an elected member of your party. He's not a normal person. There are only a few hundred people who are elected to be represent the party in public. He is one.
Yeah, a decision for somebody above my station. Obviously, if you were a member of Parliament, I'm sure the Whip's office would have a view on that.
And should they?
I imagine there's equivalent in the Assembly. I imagine there will be a conversation. But ultimately, right, both political parties, major parties, are a broad church of views. The point of conference, in many ways, is we have a debate.
But discipline is disintegrating here. We've got leaks over HS2, leaks about the net zero. You've got a person yelling at in public at the Home Secretary. It's not great.
I don't think discipline's disintegrating. Inevitably, in social media world we live in, you guys are sniffing around everything.
We're not causing him to do that. He just does it, and we report on it.
No, look, HS2 unfortunately has dominated the conversation over the last few days, hasn't it? I'm sure we'll get some clarity on that.
Second the heat off that, to be fair.
Well, yeah, maybe. I'm sure we'll get some clarity from the PM, but what we all want in that conversation is the certainty of knowing what's happening, which sounds like it's on its way.
Yeah, exactly. Look, Ben, thank you. Slightly unexpected twist to this interview, but I appreciate it nonetheless. It's Ben Bradley, Conservative MP for Mansfield. Right, loads more still to come on Suella's big speech. That's on our website as well, gbnews.com, the fastest growing national news website in the country. All the best analysis, big opinion and the latest breaking news, but don't go anywhere because we are about to hear from Nigel Farage, his hot take on Suella Braverman's speech. You don't want to miss that, and we will be playing you that clip again from Christopher Hope, our political editor, who managed to corner a protester shortly before and during and then immediately after he was thrown out of the Conservative Party conference. Don't miss that. Patrick Christys, GB News.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you.
every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other pay-per-review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christys, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back, 23 minutes past 4. You are watching or listening to me, Patrick Christys, right here on GB News. Now, later this hour, we will discuss a policy that could see more murderers given whole life orders. But let's get more now on Suella Braverman's big speech. And to do that, I am joined by Nigel Farage. Nigel, you don't seem a happy man.
Oh, lots of rhetoric. There's a hurricane of immigration coming from North Africa and elsewhere. We must be prepared. We will do whatever it takes to stop the small boats. And then, when it comes to solutions, do you know what she offered? Nothing.
The ECHR?
Nothing. She didn't even mention ECHR. We'd all expected this to be the big policy announcement on what is one of the top 2 or 3 policies in the country. You know, we've got to stop the small boats. The public want it. 70% want the small boats stopped. Think the crossings are wrong. She's offered no solutions. It is the most disappointing speech from a so-called hardline, Home Office minister we could ever have expected.
Do you think that not mentioning the ECHR and just talking about things like it will definitely be worse under Labour is particularly weak?
Oh, so we're useless. Labour will be worse.
Yeah.
It's a rainy Thursday evening. Should we go and vote? Do you know what? We'll pour another drink. What is the point of it?
Yeah.
What is the point of it? All that does is lead to Tory abstentionism. Labour would be worse. How much worse? How much higher taxes?
Well, she spoke about open borders. She said that there's a choice now.
But they've got open borders. Net migration is running at record levels. 1.2 million people settled in Britain last year. Even in the Blair days, we didn't see numbers even approaching this. I'm sorry, it is absolutely pathetic.
OK, all right. And she accused Labour of deliberately rigging the deck, saying that they were instilled the human rights act.
I don't care about Labour. I don't care about Labour. This is a government that's been in for 13 years that is asking for your vote. And they're saying the other lot are worse. We're useless, the other lot are worse. I'm sorry.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
All right. What should she have said?
That we will stop the boats. We will prevent an unnamed judge at 10 p.m. who probably, likely, wasn't even legally trained from stopping that plane going to Rwanda. We will leave the ECHR. We will complete the Brexit process. We will have, of course, every sense of liberty and human rights in the UK, but we'll be in charge. She has ducked this. This speech is the biggest failure of this conference so far.
Wow, I mean, that really is quite a claim, given that this conference has also had HS2 rearing its head.
Well, I mean, can you believe it? Here we are in Manchester. We don't know whether they're going to cancel the Manchester leg. And given Suella's performance today, maybe Rishi tomorrow won't give an answer either. They haven't got a clue. They literally run out of ideas. They run out of energy. There's nothing in that room, in that hall, worth seeing. The real debate is out here on the fringe. That's where the real debate is.
Do you think that there is a bigger disconnect than arguably there has been in the last 10, 20 years maybe between Conservative voters, Conservative members and the actual politicians?
The centre of gravity of the parliamentary party is so far apart from these people standing around here now, it's unbelievable.
But look, she used quite a lot of language there in terms of, like I was saying, Labour want open borders, etc. I know you've addressed that.
So what?
I know, yeah. But then she also went on to talk about things like, look, these people have got luxury beliefs, the luxury belief brigade, their lives aren't touched. I think she's previously called them something along the lines of, your tofu-eating people in Islington or whatever. She mentioned gender ideology. She mentioned, being proud of British history. She mentioned challenging that kind of left-wing groupthink amongst our institutions. She's spoken there about the fact that, we're doing the main threat to this country is Islamist terrorism. Do you think she was just saying all of the right phrases there without trying to mask that there wasn't a huge amount of substance?
Playing all the right notes, but not offering not one single point or promise in that speech to fix any of it.
OK, well, then my next question to you is this. On the day that Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister, caught up with our political editor and did not rule out you rejoining the Conservative Party. You care about Britain. You say that the thing that matters most to you is this country and the future of this country. Well, why don't you then join the Conservative Party and try to lead it?
Well, after this speech, I mean, are you having a laugh? I mean, a party of high tax, a party of huge legal, let alone illegal.
Wouldn't you be able to change
migration.
that?
No. This lot appear to be unchangeable. Maybe after they lose the next election and we get the real fight between the One Nation Remainers and the Leavers who want to become pro-business and low tax, maybe then we'll get some idea whether this mob are worth supporting. Right now, I wouldn't join them. I wouldn't even vote for them.
And has it been that speech, seriously, that has really crystallised putting you off?
It proves their gutlessness. It proves how weak they are. It proves they can't be bold in absolutely anything they do. This was billed to be one of the major speeches of the week. And the centrepiece was the European Convention on Human Rights. She didn't even mention it. Gutless, weak, useless.
No, I mean, it is fascinating. She also went on to talk about the fact that she says they've done a bit for grooming gangs and stopping them and making sure that those people are going to be sentenced. She said that she is going to make sure that registered sex offenders are stopped from changing their name and gender, therefore being able to mask their identity.
Until she gets challenged in court under the European Convention of Human Rights and loses. Well, we can't do anything. We can't do anything. I mean, Ben Wallace made this clear when he resigned as Defence Secretary. We can't do anything. All the while, we're under the auspices of this bizarre organisation.
But what's she afraid of? Because, again, you ask most people
What's
here...
she afraid of? Her own party, because they're split down the middle. They're 50-50. It's like Leave and Remain. This is a divided party. You know what? And a house divided against itself can't stand, can't succeed, and they won't.
So, having now attended 2 days of the Conservative Party conference, you'll, of course, be doing a show later on. I'll get you to preview what you've got coming up on that. But are you now more or less certain about a Labour victory at the next election?
More certain.
More
certain. What is coming out of this to the country? Indecision on HS2. What else? What's the big sell to the country coming out of Manchester from this conference? Can you tell me?
No.
There you are.
No, I can't, and I have been listening intently. I am quite literally paid to be here, and so yes, there we go. But of course, no doubt we'll be talking to other Conservative or Conservative MPs later on in the show. Who I will ask them that. I will say to them, okay, what is the big sell? Yeah. What is the big sell of this going forward? Yeah. What's on your show later?
Ian Duncan Smith.
Ah, there you go.
Sir Ian.
Yeah.
I'll ask him that very question. We'll have a special report from Lampedusa.
Good.
From Mark White, our Home Affairs correspondent who's been down there. And we'll realise that the vastly increased numbers crossing the Med means even more across the Channel next year, unless we act and do something.
Okay.
And I have to say, my tone tonight will be on the show one of the Tories at Manchester have let themselves down, and the country as well.
Okay, sorry, very quickly actually, because this is something that we were having a little chat about off air. I think it's quite interesting for people to know that when Nigel does walk in here, the paps are out in force. You're kind of, to be fair, the big draw of this. Okay, you get a lot of attention wherever you go. People do hang off every word that you say. But the reaction that you've had generally from Conservative Party members, has that surprised you?
Mind-blowing. I thought there could be some lingering resentment. UKIP fighting them as candidates in general elections. It's been unbelievable. I've been gobsmacked by the response. And what's been really interesting here, how many young people here. Just look around you now.
Yeah.
There are so many young people here, hungry for genuine, pro-business, Conservative ideas, worried they may never have a house, can't get on a GP list, will never have an NHS dentist, and will have to pay off the debt for our generation and our parents' generation. These people are hungry for something, and the way I've been received, Patrick, has been unbelievable.
Okay, well, I'll tell you what, Nigel, we'll be live on your television screens from 7 until 8 p.m, and it's going to be fiery. It's going to be fantastic stuff. Nigel, great. Thank you very much for coming on the show. Loads more still to come between now and 5 o'clock. I will get the reaction again of Suella Braverman's conference speech from a Tory MP, but this time from the Red Wall. I'm also going to be talking about whether or not it's okay to install full life tariffs, whole life tariffs on the most serious criminals, but retrospectively. That was something that went under the radar today and amongst all the chaos. But first, it's your latest headlines with Polly Middlehurst.
Patrick, thank you. Well, the top stories this hour are that the Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, has warned of a hurricane of mass migration into the UK in future. Speaking at the Conservative Party conference earlier on, Miss Braverman said she will stop criminal gangs, small boats, and make sure legal migration is at reasonable levels. GB News presenter Nigel Farage, though, criticised the speech, saying it offered no fixes to any problems and adding the government was out of touch with ordinary voters. Well, the Home Secretary's speech was also interrupted halfway through by a heckler. In these exclusive images obtained by GB News, Andrew Boff, a London Assembly member, was escorted from the hall. He criticised the Home Secretary and accused her policies of homophobia. In the United States, Donald Trump has labelled New York's Attorney General corrupt on the second day of his fraud trial. The former president is accused of inflating the value of his assets by billions of dollars in order to secure better loan and insurance terms. Trump has called the trial a sham and denied any wrongdoing. More on all those stories by heading to our website, gbnews.com.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
Now, a quick snapshot for you of today's markets. The pound buying you $1.2075 and €1.1535 euros. The price of gold is £1,513.90 an ounce, and the FTSE 100 is at 7,475 points.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
Let's get more reaction now to Suella Braverman's conference speech, which we brought to you a little earlier on in the show. And I'm joined by Brendan Clark-Smith, who's the MP for Bassett Law in Nottinghamshire. It's one of the Red Wall seats that the Tories won in 2019. Brendan, thank you very, very much. Well, we have just had a catastrophic, damning indictment of Suella Braverman's speech there from Nigel Farage. Where are you on it?
I think Nigel's a hard man to please, but we're all fed up at the moment with a lot of the small boats crisis issues and a few other things. I think Suella's tried to address that today, really. I thought she gave a good speech. She's very, very committed to doing this. You know, they're not just words, it's something she really believes passionately in. And she was talking about getting that legislation through as well and a few other things as well.
I suppose, though, in terms of it not just being words, but having a bit more substance behind it, coming out and saying we're going to get out of the ECHR, we're going to take back control of our borders, no more foreign judges in the dead of night in a darkened room somewhere telling us what we can and can't do. That would have been good, and there wasn't that in there, was there?
Well, that may come next. So we're waiting for the ruling that's going to come, obviously, on the with the Supreme Court over the Rwanda policy. If that goes ahead, then that's a complete game changer. Now, if that doesn't, then there may be something else that we need to do there. But what she also said in that speech, and I'm glad she really did, she mentioned the Human Rights Act. So when Tony Blair brought that in 1998, huge piece of legislation, and we've been subject to it ever since. So even though we've gone into government, of course, we had 5 years in coalition with the Liberal Democrats, they're not going to scrap that act. We've then had the referendum, we've had Brexit, we lost our majority, we've then had COVID and other things to deal with, and we've never really managed to take this piece of legislation to task. So I think domestically that may be something that comes in the future.
OK, all right, look, she also went on about the culture wars, and I do wonder whether this stuff gets enough attention, actually, because as far as she's concerned, we have a group of people who are the luxury belief brigade. Their life is not touched by a lot of the issues that they tend to say that they care about. So mass migration, their GP appointments because they all go private, or school places because their kids are at private school. We all know the kind of people Suella Braverman is talking about there. She also mentioned about, you know, gender ideology, trans stuff, being less ashamed of Britain's history, and that crucially our institutions have been captured by people who have this ideology. Do you recognise that?
Absolutely, and I've been in debates on that this week. I've been on panels about exactly the same thing, and we keep using this term culture war. Now, I'd say it's not a culture war at all. You know, women's rights are not a culture war. Child safeguarding is not a culture war. These are basic values and common sense beliefs that we have in Britain now, and they're being challenged by extreme groups of people who are trying to force this critical race theory or gender ideology onto us, and really it's about pushing back there, and I'm glad that she's identified that, and she's been brave enough to say, actually, even in the police, even in Whitehall, this is still going on, really. And you'll have seen speeches from Steve Barclay today as well. We're talking about the language that's used in the NHS. This is something that is going all the way through society. And I think a proper Conservative Party would push back on that. And I'm glad we're doing it.
Yeah, look, earlier on, I actually went out and about and was speaking to people at this conference about what they made of the doctors' strike and the consultants' strike and the radiology strike that have been taking place today just out here. So we'll play that to you shortly. But a lot of people were saying that they feel as though that's political. Do you think these strikes are political, or should you just pay them more?
Well, I think they are, and I think the independent pay review body that's been set up, they've offered 9%. That's more than nurses have got, that's more than teachers have got, that's more than anybody else has got. And some people want 35%, which I think is just unreasonable. And we know doctors do a really great job and they work very hard, but they've also got to be fair. And I think some of the things they're asking for, it's not just pay. I'm married to a doctor myself. She hasn't gone on strike. I'm very, very proud of her. Hippocratic oath.
Do you want more money there?
All of that. And, well, you know, I declare an interest
should you pay your wife more?
Well, I'm sure she would be being married to me. I think probably deserves.
She's already won the lottery.
On it, so.
Oh, you could have gone down that route. You could have gone down that route.
I
right.
can't say it, Patrick.
I'll veer away from your home life. Don't worry. Let's talk about HS2. Okay. So you are, of course, a Red Wall MP. I know that HS2 wasn't really going to go directly to your area, so you wouldn't have been affected by that. You could argue maybe that your area wouldn't have actually seen the direct benefits of HS2. But if what is rumoured to happen, which is potentially Rishi Sunak stands up tomorrow and says something along the lines of, we're going to use some of that money that would have gone to Manchester, etc., and try to link up the north with the east with the Midlands and do it on a regional level, I suppose that would benefit you, wouldn't it?
Yeah, and I think he's looked at it and he said he's concerned about the cost, and he speaks a lot about making these long-term decisions, and he thinks, well, long-term, maybe this isn't the best option. Maybe we can deliver Northern Powerhouse Rail in full without it, or maybe we can look at those local upgrades. So, for example, where you've not electrified your track, I've got rickety old trains going through my constituency where they actually want better local links. Now, we wouldn't have had the same benefit from NHS too, but if we can reinvest that in our communities at a fraction of the price, I think Ben Houchin said something about that as well, so there's a mayor that's actually on board with us making some changes there, then it could actually benefit us more.
OK, now, Nigel said very clearly, what's the big sell here? What's the big message for the Conservatives? This is, last chance saloon before the next election in terms of a conference. What is the big sell?
We're actually portraying a Conservative message again, and I think that's really important. So last couple of weeks, you'll see our polling, we've got it down to 10%-ish in some of them now. We're actually moving in the right direction. So net zero's one of these things I've been quite sceptical about it, but we've actually had a bit of common sense, bit of pragmatism. So we brought the petrol and diesel cars in line with the rest of Europe. We've looked at boilers and so on. We're listening to people on other issues, pushing back on all the woke stuff, looking at the immigration issues that people are talking about, and this is what people want to hear.
Well, Christopher Hope, our political editor, caught up with Rishi Sunak a little bit earlier on, and he did actually ask him about the net zero side of things. And Rishi Sunak appeared to suggest that there might end up being a series of votes in Parliament whereby you would vote specifically on what kind of carbon emissions targets that you want to hit, and also then about potentially wider net zero packages as a whole. Now, that's not a referendum, obviously, but it's as close, clearly, as we're going to get to it. I think it could be an interesting political move, because presumably that would force the Labour Party to come out publicly and say, right, these are the carbon targets that we want. This is the year that we want your petrol or your diesel car to be banned from. And ultimately, if that does mean costing the poorest in society the most, I suppose it could put Labour on the back foot.
Exactly, and I think that's the test with Labour at the moment. They've sat on their hands, really. They've said nothing, and whenever they put a policy out and whenever they actually have some scrutiny, and as you get closer to general election, you're going to get that, they've really struggled. So their immigration policy, you turned on that within a week, and again, net zero. OK, put your money where your mouth is, vote for it, vote against it. But what we have said is we're going to stick to that 2050 target, but we've actually had a bit of common sense introduced into it. Now, we'll probably have more debates between now and 2050. We'll have new technology. We'll maybe change some of the policies that we're doing as we go along on that path. But what we've actually done is we've said, you know what, these are the concerns you've got. We've got people living in the countryside who are worried about spending 15 grand ripping their boilers out and so on. And we've said, you know, we're not going to do that. We're actually going to take everybody with us. So even people a little bit more sceptical like me have said, actually, I can accept that. This is reasonable.
Look, we can't ignore the fact that there was a heckler, and that heckler happened to be a London Assembly member. He accused the Home Secretary of talking trash about transgender issues and making us, that was what he said about the Conservative Party, look transphobic. He accused her of dog whistle politics. Look, I'm going to have a look at some of the things she's saying here. The luxury belief brigade, Islamist extremism she mentioned. She spoke about grooming gangs. She spoke about, we need to start standing up for the rights of our own people and not the rights of paedophiles and rapists and all that. Was it a bit dog whistly?
Well, these are all things that happen, Patrick, and these are things that have been identified, really. And if you look at that hall, this is one person there. Now, I can do my Arsene Wenger impression, say I didn't see the incident or whatever it was. I saw him being taken out, and I think he obviously wanted to make a point there. And there's an opportunity to do that. We have enough panels where you can discuss it, and sometimes it's to cause a bit of a scene. But I think if you ask most people, I'm going to the LGBT reception later. We're a very, very inclusive party. We want to inject some common sense into this debate again. OK, all right, Brendan, look, thank you very much. It's great to have you on the show. It's Brendan Clark-Smith, MP there, Conservative for Bassett Law. Well, look, hey, you know the phrase, life means life. Well, the Tories have revealed that they want more murderers to be given whole life orders. But I'm wondering, especially considering some of this might even come into force retrospectively, how on earth this is going to work. And to help me pick through that, I will be joined by everybody's favourite barrister. It is, of course, Stephen Barrett. Patrick Christys on GB News, Britain's news channel.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we
get out of it. Join me at 7 p.m, Monday to Thursdays on Farage. Here on GB News, we will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Join me, Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner, Monday to Thursday, 9:30 a.m.
Who benefits from that? Not the British public.
And on Fridays, join us, Tom Harwood
And Ellie Costello from Britain's Newsroom.
That's what you get with this show. That's fantastic.
If it's happening, we're talking about it on Britain's Newsroom.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christys, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app, and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christys, on GB News and GB News Radio.
So Jubes and Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is two new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. It's 4:48. You're watching or listening to me, Patrick Christys, on GB News. At 5, I will get reaction to Suella Braverman's big conference speech. Nigel Farage was very unhappy with it. He made the point that she didn't mention the ECHR once, and that is the issue on many people's lips here at conference. He said it was weak. He said it was poor. However, a procession of Conservative MPs have said the exact opposite, so we'll continue that discussion. But this is another big issue that went underreported earlier on. Justice Secretary Alex Chalk has announced reforms to how whole life orders are applied. Now, it means that murderers who carry out sexually motivated attacks will automatically face a whole life sentence, even if they were charged before the new law is introduced. Justice Secretary Alex Chalk says that for the most dangerous and depraved killers, life really should mean life.
Now becomes the default, so it's what should happen, unless, of course, the judge decides there are exceptional circumstances. And we think that puts the law in the right place, that meets the instincts of the British people, and, as I say, does justice and provides, you know, a crumb of comfort for families after the most appalling crimes, that they feel justice is truly being served.
I'm joined now by barrister and writer Stephen Barrett. Stephen, thank you very much. I suspect that to a lot of people watching and listening to this, that will sound like good law. That will sound like proper justice. What's your view? Is it even possible?
Well, that's the important question, because I would worry that the airwaves will very soon be full of political lawyers or lawyers who give political opinions, each saying whether they like this or not. And I'm not going to say whether I like this or not. I'm going to say that it's lawful. And what the tension is there's a very old tension here. So neither you nor I would want an incoming government next year to pass a law saying that anybody who's been on the telly has committed a criminal offence and is going to prison for life. We wouldn't want that, would we? That, you know, we'd both be hoisted by our own petards. We'd be in prison for life. And there is a fundamental tenet of our law. It's a tenet, it's the word I use, principle, that you don't create a historic offence. Now, when we recreated Europe after the Second World War, we decided to give them a list of these tenets. And over time, they've morphed into law and they've morphed into enforceable rules via the Human Rights Act and via the Human Courts. But we put this tenet that you shouldn't create a brand new offence and punish people retrospectively. By the way, the people wanted that because before that, the Norman overlords had been so horrendous that they had just been inventing new things and throwing you in the oubliette whenever they felt like it. So, you know, there was a real need in sort of English national history to have this as a principle. And then we gave it to the Europeans. We gave it as Article 7 of the Human Rights Convention. But then because of the creation of a court, it's all come back to us as law. Now, as law, and I want your listeners, I want your viewers to understand that. There's a difference between a tenet or a general principle and a law. A general principle is something that you enforce 99% of the time. A law is something you have to follow 100% of the time. Now, that might sound better.
Stephen, that's an important thing. Let me just cut across here, because that's an important moment, OK? So what Alex Chalk, the Justice Secretary, was saying there, my understanding was that if somebody murders somebody in a sexually motivated attack, they would have to face a whole life tariff. Is that right?
Well, no, he did explain that the judge will have some discretion. And so what they're not doing is inventing a new crime of murder. So there's a bit of a tension in the human rights bit, because when we translated it into all of these languages, we used the word penalty. And that caused a massive court case that came about, it was actually this year that they fixed it, where the judges did manage to work out that actually this sort of stuff is perfectly legal. You're not creating a new offence, you're just changing the punishment. And that too is quite important, because if you go into sort of this brittle, this absolute position of you can never have retrospective law, well, for a start, that's difficult for taxation because we do it in taxation law quite often. Secondly, morals and feelings change. So with historic sex offences in particular, in the past, we didn't take them very seriously. Do you really want people punished to lesser standards? And the other one, by the way, that's always good on historic sex offences, is that we've invented this thing called the Sex Offenders Register. Now, we wouldn't want to be in a position where anybody who committed a crime before that register was invented didn't have to go on it, because we want them on the register now so that we can keep an eye on them. So you don't have this general principle that retrospective laws are banned. You have a sort of, we've got it back through the cleverness of our judges. We've got it back to being a sort of an understandable or more tolerable situation. But the problem and the expense of the court case and the period of confusion, that's because rather than just admitting we've always had a general tenet of our law, that you can't create a brand new offence, we reinvented the wheel with the Human Rights Act. And we reinvented, justiciability by submitting ourselves to Strasbourg. This time, luckily, Strasbourg got it right. I mean, it's always a bit like playing with a loaded gun whenever you mess with Strasbourg. So, what they're proposing will be law.
All right. Stephen, thank you very much. Always great to have your legal wisdom. Stephen Barrett there, of course, a barrister and a writer, reacting to what the Justice Secretary said right here on GB News a little bit earlier on about increasing whole life tariffs for some of the most depraved, violent and sexual criminals in this country. Absolutely loads coming your way in the next hour. We're going to be hearing from the Prime Minister, who's been talking about whether or not Nigel Farage could actually re-enter the Conservative Party. We're also going to be hearing from what he's had to say about immigration. We're going to be hearing about the big exclusive that Christopher Hope, our political editor, got from him about whether or not we're going to announce the parliamentary discourse on net zero. Nigel Farage has launched a scathing attack on Suella Braverman's speech today at Conservative Party conference. He told me that it was the biggest failure of this conference so far, and that she didn't offer one single promise to fix anything. I will also be talking about whether trans men should ever be allowed into women's prisons. Patrick Christys, GB News, Britain's news channel.
Hello again. Welcome to your latest GB News weather bulletin. I'm Alex Burkill. And we have a bit of a north-south split as we go through the next few days. The wind's wetter and windier towards the north. Meanwhile, in the south, we're going to see high pressure building, and that's going to quieten the weather down somewhat. Across northern areas, tightly packed ice bars show it's going to be blustery, and there is a weather system waiting out in the Atlantic. But through the rest of Tuesday, showers continuing, particularly towards the north and west, some clearer skies towards eastern and more southern parts. But that weather system I just mentioned pushing its way across parts of Scotland and fringing into Northern Ireland, bringing some heavy rain as we go through the night. Temperatures for many not dropping a huge amount, but in the east with some clear skies, some rural spots could dip into single figures. Then through Wednesday, we have a north-south split. A pretty cloudy, wet and blustery picture across many northern parts, particularly Scotland, where the rain will be heavy at times. Meanwhile, across England and Wales, it's a drier picture. There'll be some sunshine around, also a few showers, but I'm not expecting these to be as frequent or as intense as the showers we've seen through today. Temperatures will be similar to today, though, just about getting into the very high teens, may scrape at 20 Celsius, but the winds will be a little bit lighter, so may feel a touch warmer for some of us. Then through Thursday, we are going to see some further wet weather pushing its way in from the west, and we're likely to see further rainfall totals really building up as we go through later Thursday into Friday, particularly across western parts of Scotland. But as we go into the weekend, we're likely to see something drier and warmer pushing from the south.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo. There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christys, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us. From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Patrick Christys here at the Conservative Party conference in Manchester. An action-packed hour coming your way. We're going to be hearing from Nigel Farage, who's teed off. He said that Suella Braverman's attempt at making a speech about the small boats crossings and controlling our borders was one of the worst things that he's ever seen. We're also going to be talking about things that Kemi Badenoch had to say about keeping prisons single-sex, so no trans men going to be allowed in female prisons. We've also got our political editor, Christopher Hope, who got us a bit of an exclusive because he managed to chase after a protester who was booted out of Suella Braverman's speech, who happened to actually be a member of the Conservative Party and a Conservative Assembly member. And the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, has also given us a little bit of an exclusive, hasn't he? He's been talking to us about whether or not we're now going to see votes in Parliament on net zero. It's not quite a referendum, but they're getting there. There's loads more on the agenda as well. Patrick Christys here on GB News. Oh, yes, loads on this hour. I'll also be joined by a whole host of Conservative MPs and a few dissenting voices along the way as well. We're right in the meat and bones here now of the Conservative Party conference, and what you hear from them in the next hour could well determine how you vote at the next general election, so keep your eyes peeled. But right now, it's time for your headlines with Polly.
Patrick, thank you, and good evening to you. Well, the top story today from the GB newsroom is that the Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, has warned of a future hurricane of mass migration into the UK in her speech to the Tory party conference in Manchester. Ms Braverman says that as well as stopping illegal migrants from coming to the UK, she's going to make sure that legal migration is held at reasonable levels. GB News presenter Nigel Farage criticised the speech, saying the government is out of touch with ordinary voters. Ms Braverman says the Conservative Party will do whatever it takes, though, to stop illegal migration.
The Migration Act, which will come into force in the coming months, now means that the only route to asylum in the UK is a legal route. The Act means that those arriving illegally will be detained and removed back to their home country if possible, or to a safe third country like Rwanda. But all of this is ultimately a question of political will. And be under no illusion, we will do whatever it takes to stop the boats and deter bogus asylum seekers.
Well, the Home Secretary's speech was briefly interrupted halfway through by a heckler. In these exclusive images obtained by GB News, Andrew Boff, a London Assembly member, was escorted from the hall. He had criticised the Home Secretary and accused her policies of homophobia. Now, the Prime Minister has told GB News he's the person to deliver change to Britain. Rishi Sunak has also defended his record on illegal immigration, saying for the first time ever the number of small boats crossing the English Channel from France is down by a fifth. He also reiterated his plan to halve inflation and accused the Labour leader of being light on policy.
You've got Keir Starmer, who, no one knows what he stands for, flip-flops left and right. The country can see through that. That's not leadership. What I'm offering is different. I know people want change. I'm the person to deliver it because we're going to do politics differently. You saw that on net zero. You'll see that this week. That's what you get from a Conservative government.
Foreign prisons could be used to help combat the crisis of Britain's overflowing jails. The government's considering renting prison cells overseas to tackle prison overcrowding here. Speaking at the Tory party conference, the Justice Secretary Alex Chalk proposed the move with spare male prisoner capacity down to 258 places at the moment.
And I can tell you today, conference, that we also intend to look at the Norwegian example and explore renting overseas capacity.
Now, the Prime Minister will confirm in his Conservative Party speech tomorrow exactly what his position is on the future of the northern section of the HS2 rail project. Businesses are said to be demanding immediate clarity. Following reports, Rishi Sunak may be planning to scrap the line from Birmingham to Manchester. It's understood the Prime Minister will announce spending on other infrastructure projects for the north in his forthcoming speech. Male to female trans people could be prevented from using female-only hospital wards. Under new government plans, trans patients would be treated in separate accommodation, which the campaign group Stonewall says will be humiliating and dangerous. The Health Secretary, Steve Barclay, outlined the proposal at the Conservative Party conference earlier.
We will change the NHS constitution following a consultation later this year to make sure we respect the privacy, dignity and safety of all patients, recognise the importance of different biological needs and protect the rights of women.
Well, away from conference, junior doctors have threatened further industrial action in November and December unless they receive a credible pay offer. They have been demonstrating outside the conference in Manchester alongside consultants on day 2 of a 3-day strike. Radiographers have also walked out for 24 hours. The BMA is demanding a return to the negotiating table, but the government says after accepting the findings of an independent pay body, this year's 6% pay rise is final. And murderers who carry out sexually motivated attacks will automatically face a whole life sentence under new powers planned by the government. The legal expectation on judges will apply retrospectively to those who've already been charged with the crime but are yet to be sentenced. The Justice Secretary, Alex Chalk, says for the most and dangerous depraved killers, life really should mean life. You're with GB News across the UK, on TV, in your car, on digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying play GB News. This is Britain's news channel.
Well, a heck of a lot to get through in the next hour. We start with the Home Secretary, who's warned that a hurricane of mass migration is coming to the UK. She vowed to do whatever it takes to stop the boats and said that many immigrants lived parallel lives in UK towns and cities.
Who do people trust to deliver the change that Britain needs? Because there are huge challenges ahead. The world is being transformed by powerful forces. And I think the British people see that, perhaps more clearly than some of those in Westminster who live in the bubble of complacency. I also think most British people have a pretty good sense of how they expect their government to respond to those challenges. And I'm confident that when push comes to shove, the voters will realise that they are much more likely to get the change they really want from Rishi Sunak and the Conservatives than from any of the left-wing parties.
Well, look, what she's doing there is doubling down on what she said in Washington last week, where she said that there were around 780 million people who conceivably, under the current way that we class refugees, make their way to the Western world and live there as a refugee. That's what I think she was getting at when she was talking about a hurricane. And she also, of course, was talking there about the fact that she really wants to clamp down on the small boats. What she really wants to do is clamp down as well on what she sees as people living those parallel lives in UK towns and cities. Didn't she say as well that multiculturalism has failed, doubling down yet again on that key issue, which she did take a lot of stick for? But one person who wasn't happy was a man called Andrew Boff, who is a Conservative member of the London Assembly, who interrupted the Home Secretary's speech in protest over her comments over gender identification. He was thrown out of the conference hall, and afterwards he spoke exclusively to our breathless political editor, Christopher Hope.
My name's Andrew Boff. I'm a member of the London Assembly and a loyal Tory for 50 years.
So why are you saying to
trash about gender ideology?
Why are you saying that?
Trash about gender ideology is making our Conservative Party look transphobic and homophobic. This is not what the Conservative Party is about. We have a proud record of standing up.
But you're a Conservative.
Of course I'm Conservative.
Are you a member of the party now?
Of course I am.
So why are you shouting at
to go to the cloakroom? The cloakroom? No, we'll get you.
You're going to be leaving the site, please, sir. Your name, sir, is Andrew Boff.
Andrew Boff, and I'm a member of the London Assembly, a member of the party for 50 years and a proud member.
So I'm not going to shout at your Home Secretary.
because she was talking absolute arrant nonsense about gender ideology, about wokeness and all the rest of it. Our party has a proud record of standing up for LGBT plus rights, and she's destroying it. And it's time she sorted out her own department rather than giving this trash away.
If you are leaving the site, you'll have to come in on me. Andrew, why are you saying that though?
Sorry?
Why are you saying that? Why are you saying that?
Can I have my thing out of the...
Yeah, we'll get that property sorted. Andrew, why are you saying that? Why are you saying that about to Braven?
Well, because she's scapegoating trans people, gay people, anybody who doesn't fit her model. She's dog whistling, and she's also presiding over a department that's failing dismally in terms of processing asylum seekers.
Yeah, more on that shortly, OK, with the man himself who managed to get us that exclusive, chasing him out, political editor Christopher Hope. But another man who wasn't happy with Suella Braverman's speech was Nigel Farage, who will be live 7 till 8 p.m. from this very seat. In fact, he was absolutely scathing about the Home Secretary's performance.
Rhetoric. There's a hurricane of immigration coming from North Africa and elsewhere. We must be prepared. We will do whatever it takes to stop the small boats. And then, when it comes to solutions, do you know what she offered? Nothing.
The ECHR?
Nothing. She didn't even mention ECHR. We'd all expected this to be the big policy announcement on what is one of the top 2 or 3 policies in the country. You know, we've got to stop the small boats. The public want it. 70% want the small boats stopped. Think the crossings are wrong. She's offered no solutions. It is the most disappointing speech from a so-called hardline, Home Office minister we could ever have expected.
Doesn't this just about completely sum up where the Conservative Party, arguably the country, is at the moment? You've got one chap standing up saying this is absolutely outrageous, you're a transphobe, this is dog whistle politics, we can't possibly have this, and he gets evicted from the conference. Then you've got another chap standing up here, Nigel Farage, who's been, frankly, one of the biggest draws that we've seen at the political conference so far, saying there's no way that she's gone far enough, there's no action here, this is just empty words. Here to pick through this noise is GBNews' political editor, Christopher Hope, who you may have noticed actually was in his efforts to try to get us that exclusive, inadvertently turfed out of conference as well. You lost your pass, you're back with us now. Look, was that as much of a mess as it's been made out? You've got Nigel Farage on the right, quite literally, criticising it. You've got Andrew Boff on the left, also criticising it. I mean, who's right?
Well, I thought that the language of Suella Braverman, I mean, they loved it in the hall. Let's start with
OK, so did they then?
Yeah, the members loved it, OK. She said that the Human Rights Act was a criminal rights act, So the language he's talking there is language which I think maybe Mr Farage, were he here, might approve of it. The hurricane of immigration, I think, will be a problem for those on the left of the party.
Is this like the line invasion again?
Yeah, the word invasion, swarm. This kind of language can be used by the right to try and energise voters, but it also can be used to be slightly inflammatory in terms of race, not relations as much as with migrants, and that's the concern about it. I think the left will be uneasy about that form of language, but no question, Suella Braverman, she's one to watch. We had Priti Patel here moments ago, didn't we? She's obviously, she and Suella are fighting out for the right wing of the party if there's a Leave election next year.
Yeah, look, very shortly I'm hoping to be joined by the former Justice Secretary Sir Robert Buckland, who also happens to be the Conservative MP for South Swindon. That will be happening very, very shortly. She also went on, didn't she, to talk about a vote for Labour is a vote for open borders, OK? She says that Labour had deliberately tried to rig the illegal migrant setup, and that the Conservatives were the only party who could possibly control borders. Is there any truth to that? I mean, we're going to be at the Labour conference next week. I mean, are they going to have to now come up with something that at least shows that they want to stop mass migration?
It's not entirely true, is it? We're in a party conference here where you make points to make political points. They're not on the open border party, Labour. What they're not doing is the extra bit, the Rwanda plan, which is meant to break the business model of these people who send migrants across from France. But what they're doing is they're trying to strengthen the idea of more support for the French police, for the enforcement agencies, which the UK government is trying to do with the Tories, but they're going a bit further, they think, Labour would.
Yeah, so the Labour angle on this is international cooperation. Let's do as much as we possibly can with the French, just do as much as possibly can with the European Union, do as much as possibly can with Europol, etc.
They get on better, don't they? That's the idea, so they can work better, more closely with the EU. That might lead to, us the UK working more closely with the EU, which may be a problem for some people to back Brexit.
Okay, I mean, the irony there would be if we vote Labour to protect our borders. I suppose that would be, I suppose, the spin that we're going to hear next week. I can bring in Benjamin Butterworth now, who is a GB News contributor. Benjamin, the first thing I've got to ask you, okay, is we did have an individual, a protester there, a Conservative member, who was thrown out. The initial issue that he was thrown out for was he basically accused the Home Secretary of being transphobic. You are, of course, a member of the LGBTQ+ community. Do you think she's transphobic?
Yes, absolutely. And I think what you saw today was Suella scapegoating a group to try and excuse her obvious failings. It's not transgender people who have been coming over the border in boats, or transgender people that are coming over in numbers as immigrants far greater than she says. But she obsesses over this tiny group of people who have so little power in society and in institutions because she thinks she can get people to focus on them.
I do just want to clarify one thing. She wasn't talking about transgender people coming over in boats. She was talking about them in prisons as well, wasn't she? So whether or not me, as a man, could commit a violent sexual act and then go to a women's prison, that's what she wants to stop, right?
Exactly. I mean, that's my point, right? She should be talking about people coming over in boats, not transgender people. And when she talks about, for example, single-sex prison spaces, or endorses the health secretary saying that trans women will be banned from single-sex hospital beds, I think the real question here is, what does she mean by transgender? Because legally, there are people who have had their their sex rather, changed on their birth certificate. Now, will she be intending to undo that and the equalities legislation in order to introduce this? I think what she's suggesting in terms of both prisons and the endorsement of the hospital decision is actually going to be very difficult to implement. And I think much like how she has implied
that's
before...
interesting. No, but Benjamin, that's interesting. Benjamin, that's really interesting, right? Because you say it's going to be really difficult to implement. It may well be difficult to implement because it could end up being blocked by the ECHR, which is something that she didn't mention. I mean, Nigel Farage kicked right off about that. And I've got to tell you, walking around here, the ECHR, people want out. OK, there's not everyone who wants out, but the vast majority do want out. She didn't even mention it. You could argue she's not even played to her base there.
I mean, the truth is that the time it would take to leave the ECHR, it would not only divide the Parliamentary Conservative Party, and they may well not have the numbers to get it through Parliament. That's the first reality. The second is that we're now increasingly looking at the chance of an election in May. A lot of the chatter is that they're trying to nosedive into a slightly earlier election than imagined and trying to whip up the frenzy around these issues. Now, there ain't a chance they could do that by May. And I think the truth is Rishi Sunak is against leaving the ECHR. And I think this plays into this idea that the Tory party is bereft of ideas and tearing itself apart. That's what you see when you have people like Andrew Boff, the London Assembly member who Christopher Hope managed to get the interview with, criticising after 50 years in the party. I think it's out of ideas.
OK, all right, look, thank you very much, Benjamin. It's Benjamin Butterworth there. Just stay on the line for me a second in case I come back to you. GB News contributor Christopher Hope is still with me here on our stand here at Conservative Party conference in Manchester. Now, earlier on, you interviewed Rishi Sunak, didn't you? And there were some killer lines that came out of that. Could you run us through it? Because there's some important updates here, I think.
That's right. We went across a lot of areas in our 5 minutes with the Prime Minister. He talked there about the idea of net zero. I've been troubled for a while. There's never been a single vote by MPs on net zero. Of course, it was passed without a vote in Parliament that we're going to hit this net zero target back in June 2019. He says there will be a vote on his plans to row back on some of the targets. That'll put Labour into a bind. Labour must either vote for this 2030 target or 2035 target for banning the sales of new petrol and diesel cars. So it's a trap for the Labour Party coming up, and that shows an increasing.
So that would force the Labour Party into a position where, at the time of the next election,
they must say
they could be battered with the stick of you wanted to make the worst off in society poorer by making them get heat pumps and electric cars.
Exactly, that's right. And that's why it's a bit clever what they're doing. It shows a degree of being political, which you haven't seen before for the operation. He said, I asked, the three cabinet ministers of the weekend said that leaving the ECHR, the European Convention of Human Rights, is on the table. He avoided that question and went on about the small boats, saying that we'll cut numbers by 20%.
Now, this is a subtle shift, because we have seen the line about leaving the ECHR being very much on the table.
That was used by 3 ministers at the weekend.
And then today...
Not used at all by her.
Not used at all by Suella Braverman or Rishi Sunak.
And was one person who used that was Suella Braverman in the Mail Sunday. Michael Gove used it, and another, I think Kevin Bade not used it too. And I thought that's obviously a line approved by the government. It wasn't used. It's interesting. He talked about inflation being the evil, a big word there, inflation. So that shows how they're taking on inflation rather than tax cuts. And the issue of Nigel Farage, our old friend here, the colleague here from GB News, I asked, should he be allowed to rejoin the Tory party? He left many, many years ago over Brexit. He said the Tory party is a very broad church, right? Not broad church, the ITV drama series where someone gets murdered. But not known yet.
They used to tell you the mood Nigel was in earlier, you never know.
But Broadchurch being, we take anybody, even Nigel Farage.
Even Nigel Farage, well, the door's open for him. Anyway, look, thank you very much. He, for what it's worth, slammed that door shut himself of his own volition. Some would call it the tail wagging the dog there, actually, saying that after what he'd just heard from inside that conference room, there was no way he'd rejoin the Conservative Party. Christopher, thank you. I'll go back to you shortly. And Benjamin, thank you very much as well. Benjamin Butterworth there, GB News contributor. Very shortly, the MP for South Swindon and the former Justice Secretary, Sir Robert Buckland, will be sitting exactly where Christopher Hope was sitting, having a chat with me about what was, well, potentially a bit of a damp squib from Suella. What did you make of it? Do you think it was good or bad? GB Views at gbnews.com. Get those views coming in, but cultural war issues have played out heavily during this conference as well. Kemi Badenoch, the Minister for Women and Equalities, has been talking up the Conservatives' position on single-sex prisons and stopping convicted rapists from entering women's jails in Scotland. I will be joined by people who want to keep prisons single-sex. Patrick Christys on GB News, Britain's news channel.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Monday to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Join me, Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner, Monday to Thursday, 9:30 a.m.
Who benefits from that? Not the British public.
And on Fridays, join us, Tom Harwood
and Ellie Costello from Britain's Newsroom.
That's what you get with this show. That's fantastic.
If it's happening, we're talking about it on Britain's Newsroom.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christys, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christys, on GB News and GB News Radio.
So Jubes and Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. All action here at Conservative Party Conference. 25 minutes past 5. You're watching or listening to me, Patrick Christys, on GB News. I'm very pleased to be joined by the Conservative MP for South Swindon and the former Justice Sack. It is Sir Robert Buckland. That's first and foremost. So, Sir Robert, I will start with you on this, of course. So, we've just heard from Suella Braverman, OK? Now, Suella Braverman spoke a lot about a hurricane of mass migration. Now, you disagree with that, do you?
Well, look, I think we've got to be very careful with the language. I don't disagree with looking, frankly, at the problem of mass migration. We've got all these people in sub-Saharan Africa. Clearly, you know, life there is not sustainable. It's becoming increasingly unsustainable. People are coming for economic reasons to Europe. Why not? It's an attractive place to come. Of course it is. But I think rather than using language about extreme weather conditions, we should be looking at the why and dealing with why it is that people are coming and therefore working as hard as we can to deal with the problem at source.
I put it to you that maybe you're part of this luxury belief brigade that she was talking about. Most people care about their local hotel and whether or not that's going to be turned into an asylum centre. They're taxpayer. You're talking about international issues, Robert?
No.
People want to know what's going on.
Because they're linked. Because people aren't stupid. Don't insult their intelligence by saying that somehow people just arrive at a hotel and it's not related to what's happening globally. Of course it is. And I think that what we need to do is rise to the level of events, talk about the reasons for this and deal with them internationally at source. That's what responsible politicians should do. That's what I tried to do when I was in government. And it's certainly not a luxury. You know, I'm a very hard-bitten former criminal barrister dealing with all sorts of people from all sorts of walks of life, and I have hotels in my constituency. I live this. I know the reality.
Do Labour want open borders?
Look, I don't rely on the Labour Party for anything. I mean, they talk airy, fairy stuff about what they think they can do about immigration. The truth is, none of their policies add up, and I don't think they can be trusted to be as firm and clear about the problem and the challenge of mass migration as the Conservatives.
Because, I mean, to be fair, you are obviously relying quite a lot on them not getting their act together over immigration based on what Suella Braverman had to say. Now, I'm going to move on from this now because I think it's worthwhile really having the former Justice Secretary here, as well as Kate Coleman, who is, you know, keeping prisons single sex. That's the group that you're from, Kate. And this was another big aspect of Suella Braverman's speech. She talks about gender ideology, which I thought was really good, but also the Minister for Women and Equality's Kemi Badenoch praising the Conservatives' record on single-sex prisons. I think we can have a listen to Kemi now.
It was this Conservative government that stopped shameful SNP and Labour politicians in Scotland pursuing a self-ID policy that let convicted rapists pretend that they were actually women so they could be housed in a women's prison with potential new victims.
Kate, great to chat to you. Thank you very much for coming on the show. That must be music to your ears then. So we've got Kemi Badenoch there saying that convicted rapists who are men should not be going into a women's prison. Bit of common sense.
Well, it is a bit of common sense, really, isn't it? And in fact, the MOJ went further than this at the beginning of the year, well, actually at the end of March, when it's any male prisoner who's been convicted of any violent or sexual offence, not just against women, or any male prisoner who's got intact male genitalia is not eligible to be held in the female estate at all. And I think what's really significant about this is that it cuts across gender recognition certificate status. And the MOJ has really gone above and beyond, I think, above all other departments in government to actually centre safeguarding which is a real shift, because up until now we've been very much focused on rights, we've been very much focused on individual rights of transgender
it ties
prisoners.
into what Suella Braverman said as well today, which is that it's about time that we worried less about the rights of sexual offenders and more about the rights of ordinary people.
Absolutely.
Frankly, which I think is an important thing. What would you say, just playing devil's advocate, to people who go, it's less, it's a fraction of a percentage of people who are in this practice, so why bother?
Well, why bother? Because women in prison are amongst one of the most vulnerable, marginalised populations in the country. That you can have a single male prisoner in one women's prison who can quite successfully terrorise the entire population of that prison. And I know from the conversations I've had with both officers and prisoners that this happens.
Okay.
You know, you'll get a male prisoner who terrorises a prison wing. He'll get transferred to another prison wing. He then terrorises the population of women there because violent sex, or because they're just simply men. They are just simply men, and we are dealing with a population of women, most of whom who have, they've experienced violent and sexual offences against them, often since childhood, and they need a place of safety. And to then gaslight them by holding them with a man and saying, no, this is a woman, and you must refer to that prisoner as such, is...
Well, it's ridiculous.
It's ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous.
And something similar issues going on in the schools at the moment. We haven't quite got time to go into that. So, Robert, look, you were very strong that you thought the language of there's a hurricane of mass migration, legal migration, you thought that was too strong. What about the strength of Suella Braverman saying, it's time to worry less about the rights of sexual offenders, paedophiles and rapists. It's more time to worry about us. Was that dog whistle?
When I was in government, I made sure that sex offenders who committed offences of more than 4 years stayed in prison for longer, because I believe in public protection. Absolutely no doubt about that. And I absolutely endorse what's just been said about the need to protect women prisoners from predatory males who have intact genitalia. I mean, it's as plain as a pikestaff, and that's absolutely the right approach by my former department. But, look, coming back to the point, it's all very well to sound tough about immigration. What's important is being smart about immigration. Now, it's a tough, difficult issue, but I think with intelligent answers about the why people are coming to Europe, I think then we can actually start to crack this. But we won't do this on our own. We've got to work with other countries. But
was
clear.
Part of that not? I mean, we've returned back to immigration now, but was part of that not what Suella Braverman was saying when she was begging the UN Refugee Council to say, look, come on, change the definition of a refugee?
I don't disagree
with discussion.
Yeah, but hold on. The UN Refugee Convention, I think, is a product of many countries, and therefore you need to look at it internationally. I don't disagree with the fact it's now 70 years old and needs looking at, but it's a question of also being honest with the British people and being realistic about the extent of what we can do.
Okay.
There's still more to do. I think the government's doing the right thing, but we've got to also be honest with the British people.
The reason why I'm cutting across you is not to be rude. I am very sorry about this, but I have got some breaking news to bring you, which is that Suella Braverman has said that senior London Tory Andrew Boff, who heckled her during her Conservative conference speech, should be forgiven and let back into conference.
Quite right.
Well, that is interesting. You all heart?
Oh, I entirely agree with Suella. I mean, I'm sure she would have been mortified.
Oh, we've heard from you. You'll let anyone in.
No, hold on. I've been coming to Tory party conferences for 30 years.
I'm only
free
joking.
speech is part of who we are, and I know Suella agrees with that as well. So I'm not surprised by her comment, and I entirely endorse it.
I was only pulling your leg. Don't worry. Just one last one with you, Kate, while I've got you very quickly, is out of what you've heard from the two political parties at the moment, in line of your issue about keeping prison single-sex, where are you? Who are you leaning towards? What are you hearing?
It's not even a question, is it? I mean, it's the Conservatives all the way.
OK.
Absolutely.
And Suella Braverman did say, allude to, and to Kemi, that Keir Starmer can't even tell you what a woman is.
He doesn't know. He doesn't know what a woman is. Of course, it's a problem. Of course, it's a problem.
Both of you, thank you very much. There's quite wide-ranging stuff there, back and forth, but much appreciated. Thank you. So loads more still to come between now and 6 o'clock. Two Tories will give their reaction to Suella Braverman's conference speech. Don't forget that Nigel Farage, of course, was very critical of it. We'll be hearing from him as well. But first, yes, it is time for your latest headlines with Polly Middlehurst. Back to you.
Well, the latest headlines this hour are that
The Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, has warned of a hurricane of mass migration into the UK in future. Speaking at the Conservative Party conference earlier on today, Ms Braverman said she would stop criminal gangs, small boats and make sure legal migration was at reasonable levels. GB News presenter Nigel Farage, though, criticised the speech, saying it offered no promises to fix any problems, adding that the government was out of touch with ordinary voters. Also today, the Home Secretary said the heckler who interrupted her Conservative Party conference speech should be forgiven and let back into conference. These exclusive images obtained by GB News show Andrew Boff, who's a Conservative London Assembly member. He was escorted from the hall after saying that the Home Secretary's anti-trans policies amounted to homophobia. GB News interviewed him outside the conference hall. And the Prime Minister is yet to confirm the government's position on the future of the northern leg of HS2. Businesses are demanding immediate clarity. Following reports, Rishi Sunak is planning to scrap the line from Birmingham to Manchester. More on all those stories by heading to our website, gbnews.com.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
Let's take a look then at the markets for today, and the pound buying you $1.2077 and €1.1543. The price of gold, if you fancy an ounce, is £1,000 and £511 and 70 pence. And the FTSE 100 has closed the day at 7,470 points.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News, investments that matter.
OK. Let's get more reaction to Suella Braverman's conference speech, which we brought to you a little bit earlier on in the show. Nigel Farage told me it was the biggest failure of this conference so far, and that she didn't offer one single promise to fix anything. But what do Tory MPs make of it? You might have got a sneak preview of them earlier on there. Damien Green, who's the former First Secretary of State, and James Daly, who's the MP for Barry North, just up the road from here, actually. Join me now. Chaps, thank you very, very much. I believe that, look, for a bit of context, shall we just play a little clip of what Nigel Farage had to say about it? So Nigel steamed out of that particular meeting there, came here and unloaded. Let's hear it, and then we'll get some reaction.
Rick, there's a hurricane of immigration coming from North Africa and elsewhere. We must be prepared. We will do whatever it takes to stop the small boats. And then, when it comes to solutions, do you know what she offered? Nothing.
The ECHR?
Nothing. She didn't even mention ECHR. We'd all expected this to be the big policy announcement on what is one of the top 2 or 3 policies in the country. You know, we've got to stop the small boats. The public wants it. 70% want the small boats stopped. Think the crossings are wrong. She's offered no solutions. It is the most disappointing speech from a so-called hardline, Home Office.
Damien Green, I'll start with you. Was she wrong to not mention the ECHR?
No, I think she made a series of points about migration. The ECHR is largely, it's much more irrelevant to the whole debate than people think. People think, oh, you can't do the Rwanda policy because of the ECHR. Actually, it's the English courts operating, and as they would operate, if the ECHR had never been written under English common law, you can't deport people to somewhere that's dangerous. And the argument is whether Rwanda is dangerous or not. I don't think it is. The British government doesn't think it is, and I hope the Supreme Court agrees with that. But either way, the ECHR is a smokescreen. It's irrelevant. And on the whole, if Nigel Farage disliked the speech, then it makes me warm to it.
Really? Well, that is interesting. James, do you think the ECHR is an irrelevant smokescreen?
I think the most important thing that people want, when you see the words ECHR to most people out there, they're not interested in that. They just want to know that the government are going to take strong measures to curb illegal migration. And I agree with Damien that the Rwanda policy is what has broad support in my constituency, I think probably in Damien's as well. Let's just get on with it. The one thing this Home Secretary does show is a determination to address a very real concern regarding small boats and illegal migration. I think, much as I like Nigel personally, I think Suella could have said literally anything and he would come out and said that.
OK, all right. So you don't think that the ECHR is going to hold us back from getting flights off to Rwanda then? Because, I mean, that is a massive issue. People think that is a way of us offering that deterrent. I mean, without that, it was just a lot of words and not a lot of potential action.
I agree with James when you say it's a massive issue.
Yeah.
It's not, you know, I don't get emails about it.
About immigration?
Oh, immigration's a massive issue. Sorry, I thought you meant the ECHR was a massive issue. Immigration absolutely is a massive issue, and we need to get the numbers of people coming across in boats coming down. Rwanda will help as a deterrent on that. So, as I say, I hope the Supreme Court comes to a decision that says we can start the flights to Rwanda. But my point is that it is the British courts deciding this.
OK, all right. Well, look, what would you say to people like that London Assembly member there, who may or may not be back in any moment, apparently, who said that this was dog whistle stuff? I've got some of the quotes here from Suella Braven. You know, we should, Labour are the party of open borders, we're the party of strong borders, the Human Rights Act should be called the Criminal Rights Act. She spoke about bogus asylum claims. Is it dog whistle transphobic? Well, the transphobic stuff came later. Is it dog whistle stuff?
It's not. People, I think, thank God we live in a country where people have got the ability to be able to say things in a way. We don't want people to be offended in any way. You know, we do our best as politicians to be reasonable, to be proportionate in our language. If Suella chooses to use that language, then people should judge her on that. What I judge Suella on is actually what she's doing. And so, what I do agree with Nigel on this point is, if people want a reduction in small boats and a reduction in illegal immigration into this country, rather than just having a discussion about words, let's have a look at actions and deeds and what's actually.
But what are they then? What are the actions and deeds that we can do? We're paying the French a load of money. We can't turn the boats back. We're paying £8 million a day in hotel. What can we do?
Yeah, the legislation to go through Rwanda, I think, will make a huge deterrent effect.
Bet the house on that, won't you?
Well, listen, I'm on the Home Affairs Select Committee.
Yeah.
I've actually met the French. I was actually on the beaches in Calais.
Right.
Not only were the French politicians saying this would be a real deterrent, the French police were saying this as well, and people don't want.
But what if we're blocked?
I'm very confident that our justice system will act in line with its responsibilities and respect the democratic view of Parliament, which I know you do as well, Pat.
Oh, I do. I have the utmost respect for it, as you well know. Look, let's just hear quickly from Rishi Sunak, who spoke earlier with Christopher Hope, our political editor, on migration.
Because of all the things we're doing. The new deal I signed with Albania, we've returned almost 3,000 illegal migrants to Albania, and you know what? They've stopped coming. Yeah. That's why we need to get Rwanda up and running. Now, I am confident that the plans we've got in place will work. They will deliver. They've got a lot to do. Of course we've got a lot to do, but this is a huge priority for me, and we're making a difference.
OK, so off the back of this Conservative Party conference, are you more or less confident of winning the next election?
Oh, I'm more confident, and we haven't yet heard the Prime Minister's speech. I think the truth is all parties...
Which, by the way, during that speech, he is widely expected to announce that here in a disused railway station in Manchester, HS2 is not going to come to Manchester.
Well, let's...
And you're more confident?
Let's see what he says about that first.
OK.
But yeah, let's not anticipate. But genuinely, all conferences exist in a huge bubble, and we all get obsessed by it. Out there, by the end of this week, people will remember what the Prime Minister said and probably not much else about the conference. So the truth is, it is too early to tell about this conference because we haven't heard the Prime Minister's speech. And of course, it's an unusually important, all Prime Minister speeches are important at party conference. This is an unusually important one because we know there's going to be an election in the next year and he hasn't done one.
Do you know when it is?
What, the election?
Yeah.
No idea, but I'm
You wouldn't tell me even if you did know, would you?
That's certainly true. But the only person who can decide is the Prime Minister, and he hasn't told me. My guess is it's October.
Yeah.
That would seem perfectly sensible to me because we'll then see the economic recovery that we're just beginning to see now. By this time next year, people will have seen the benefit of the tough decisions. We've all had tough times, but the tough decisions the government has taken will be getting the benefits obvious by the summer and autumn of next year.
What do you want Rishi Sunak to say in his speech, then?
I want the country to see the Rishi Sunak that I know, that Damien knows. He's a man with a bold vision. He's a man who is committed to levelling up. He believes that all parts of the country should be funded and provided with the resources to make sure that no matter what your background, that you can achieve your potential. Rishi is, and whether people take a different view is a matter for them. He is a great man. He is a kind man. He's a man who's committed to this country and wants to do the right thing. And when people see that, I think they're going to see a politician that they want to back, certainly over Keir Starmer, Mr. Flip-Flop.
Right, so Red Wall MP, OK, yep. You've said that Rishi Sunak is a man who cares about Britain.
Absolutely.
You know, likes delivering things. Look, we're possibly on the brink of HS2 not happening when it comes to Manchester. That's going to go down badly in the Red Wall, isn't it? We were supposed to be, connecting.
Yeah, but Patrick, we're getting back to
where's levelling up?
We're getting back to politics like this. One of the reasons why I like GB News is when you present shows, you're interested in what people in Kent, Damien's constituents, what people in Bury, what matters to them. Those issues that hit them between the face when they go out, the door every single day. HS2 is a big infrastructure project, but it is. What my constituents are reasonable, pragmatic people. They want to know that they're getting bang for their buck. They want to know that it's value for money. They want to know that costs are spiralling out of control, how much that is going to be. And so if the Prime Minister has taken a view, I don't know this. Okay. Costs are spiralling. We are not getting a significant return on our money. That's an important thing.
I get that. I think that regardless of people's views on HS2, the unfortunate thing is that if it doesn't end up happening, it's difficult to say that it's not a little bit embarrassing, I suppose, given the amount of money that's gone into it. One last one for you. Net zero, we heard Rishi Sunak there talk to our political editor, Christopher Hope, about having votes in Parliament about things like our carbon targets and the pace at which net zero is going to take place, backing Labour into a corner to make them come out and say, yeah, we want to hurtle towards this by 2030. The insinuation there would be that the Labour Party would then be the party that voted to make some of the worst off in society poorer with things like heat pumps and getting electric cars. Do you think that's a smart move or not?
I think it's very important that we stick to the net zero target for 2050.
Yes.
And how we get there, I appreciate we can have a discussion about. If Labour want to say that everything is stuck in stone now, between now and 2050, then they'd be mad to do that. So I think Rishi's approach is perfectly sensible.
Do the people of Bury North care about net zero, do you think?
I think there's certainly some people. I think there are other people who take a rather more pragmatic view in respect of it. And the one thing they do care about, Patrick, is they don't want ordinary people to be taxed into oblivion and businesses to be taxed into oblivion to reach a target which is a long way off.
Right, I've got a very quick clip to bring you of Rishi Sunak being asked about our political editor, Christopher Hope, about whether or not there's a place for Nigel Farage in the clip. Oh, let's have a look. Oh, unfortunately, we haven't got that clip. But there we go. Rishi Sunak did say that the party was a broad church, and so he didn't rule out Nigel Farage rejoining the Conservative Party. Your view?
It is a broad church based on Conservative principles. If Nigel wants to announce that he's taken up Conservative principles and mean it, then whatever. But I would be sceptical that we're ever going to hear that.
Would you have him?
Of course, yeah. If Nigel's a Conservative. We all know that. He called himself UKIP and various other things, but he's a Conservative. I'm sure that he wants to come back into the party and a party that espouses his same beliefs.
Right, this is the Tory party difference of opinion. Good stuff. All right, guys, thank you very much. Great to have you on the show. Much appreciated. There we've got Damien Green, of course, as well as James Daly, two Tory MPs there. Now, we are going to be very shortly having a little bit of a conversation about foreign aid. Yes, that's right. We're going to finish the show with a debate about whether or not foreign aid is too high, whether or not we should be rowing back on it. Patrick Christys, GB News, see you in a tick.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christys, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
OK, so foreign aid, massive talking point here at conference, especially today. But just how much money should Britain be sending abroad? Yes, that's what I went out and about and spoke to a couple of people here at conference to get the views of the general public.
Britain is my home, and that's what I care about most. I'm not particularly interested in propping up failing governments and their failing projects. I'm interested in improving our British citizens' lives and their futures. You know, I'm a young person myself. You know, there's so many different things that I want to achieve in life, and I want to know that my government's on my own side.
We're helping people in genuine need, but my understanding that loads of money is going to climate change rubbish initiatives, to total scams in India and places like that. So we should not be doing that.
No, I support the foreign aid budget. I would prefer to see it reinstated to 0.7%. I know that there are a lot of international development charities that do fantastic work. I think it's very good value for money to be able to cut off a lot of problems at the source. You know, one of the big problems that's been discussed here is, large-scale immigration from places that are being affected by famines and droughts, for instance, in East Africa.
All right, let's finish the show with a bit of a debate. I'm joined now by the head of campaigns at the Taxpayers Alliance, Elliot Keck, and the Chief Executive Officer at the Coalition for Global Prosperity, Ryan Henson. Elliot, I'll start with you. Foreign aid, scrap it?
I think certainly we need to look at cutting it. We need to be honest about what foreign aid is. It's not humanitarian spending designed to save lives, not in reality. What it is a vast sum of money that goes towards often absurd and at the very least absurdly optimistic projects. Let's just take a couple, for example. So in recent years, we've given about £12 million to a project to provide condoms in Pakistan, a highly conservative religious society, which you're not going to change overnight with £12 million. Another one, £1.6 million.
That's a lot of condoms, though.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, £1.6 million for peace and reconciliation in Sudan, a country which, following that project, descended into utter civil war. So we need to be honest.
I get that point. Is it a waste of money?
Absolutely not. I mean, I support overseas aid for two reasons. First, it's the right thing to do. It could be us. We have a duty as a relatively wealthy country to look after those who can't help themselves. But I also support it because it's in our national interest. It makes far more sense to help people where they are rather than have them come to the UK or have to deal with the consequences of a failed state. Far more effective to help people as they are rather than deal with the consequences.
Can we have a couple of examples of how somewhere where it's worked really well?
Sure. Well, I think let's look at vaccines, for example. The UK led the world in creating a vaccine to COVID COVID. We shared that vaccine with countries in the developing world. We're now doing the same on malaria. So the British people can be really, really proud that we've done so much to keep people alive who may otherwise have died from malaria.
Did that came out of foreign aid then?
Yeah.
It was the fact that we sent some vaccines.
Yeah, it's through the Gavi Vaccine Alliance, yeah.
I mean, that's all right, isn't it?
Certainly a good example of where foreign aid spending has been used well, but as your viewers will know and as British taxpayers will know, that's not the norm. And listen, ultimately, if you want to use British aid money in a way that actually saves lives, they estimate, there's an organisation that estimates that the cheapest way to save a life is to give $5,000 to essentially fund malaria treatments. If we really wanted to save lives, it would be going exclusively to that, essentially. Yeah. But because there's this nebulous desire for what we call soft power, but which nobody can ever really define and which nobody can ever really measure, we end up pumping money into projects that at best fail and at worst are just, frankly absurd right from the off.
Yeah, I mean, there is a perception, isn't there, that quite a lot of British taxpayers' money does find its way into the back pockets of grubby dictators or completely pointless girl bands like the Ethiopian Spice Girls Yagna, which is one of the infamous cases the Daily Mail wheels out every now and again. So that stuff does happen, doesn't it?
It does, but I think we need to be cautious not to throw the baby out with the bathwater. If you abolished the MOD every time there was a procurement scandal, there'd be no army left, for example. Right. Most aid is really well spent, and it's well spent because here we are right now scrutinising it. Parliament scrutinises it, the Daily Mail scrutinises it as you do.
Exactly. We are in the middle of a cost of living crisis at the moment. Tax is the highest it's ever been, I think, since the Second World War anyway.
Yeah.
Is it now harder to justify spending somewhere in the region of £11 billion a year on foreign projects? Some of which I believe I'm right in saying, some of which goes to China?
I think that has since been wrapped up, but you're absolutely right. It has gone to China in the past. It's still going to India. And I think the problem is, listen, we're not very good at spending money even domestically. Whitehall is very, very bad at spending money even domestically. So the idea that it's going to be better at spending money abroad, precisely the places where British taxpayers won't actually directly experience it, I think it's for the birds.
Is it hard to justify then? You've got people in this country at the moment who are thinking, I've got to have to buy a new electric car at some point, I'm going to have to get a heat pump, I've been told to do all of this. The cost of my weekly shop's going through the roof. But rest assured, there's a family in Nigeria who've got a few more goats.
Well, look, the point I would make is if we don't do overseas aid, the problems that will affect us will happen anyway. It's just that they'll be worse. Take, for example, Jim Mattis, who served Donald Trump as Defence Secretary, not a bleeding heart liberal by any means. He said to Congress, the less you spend on aid, the more I have to spend on bullets. Better to deal with problems now than deal with the consequences afterwards.
What a way to finish the show. Chaps, thank you very much. Thoroughly enjoyed that. Great stuff. That is, of course, the head of campaigns at the Taxpayers Alliance, Elliot Keck, and the Chief Executive Officer at the Coalition for Global Prosperity, Ryan Henson. Hey, which side of the fence are you on? GBViews at gbnews.com. Can I just say thank you very much, everybody who's been tuning in, watching and listening throughout the course of this Conservative Party conference. Michelle Dewberry will be up next from our Paddington studios. Then after that, of course, you've got the man himself, the man of the conference, really, Nigel Farage will be with you 7 until 8. He's got a whole host of great guests, including Ian Duncan Smith with him, so make sure that you don't miss that. He's got a lot to get his teeth stuck into, not least, of course, our Home Secretary's speech. Some people thought it was a tough one, but she said all the right things. Nigel thinks she didn't mention the ECHR, and that's bad. Where are you? Stay tuned.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us. From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Join me, Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner, Monday to Thursday, 9:30 a.m.
Who benefits from that? Not the British public.
And on Fridays, join us, Tom Harwood
and Ellie Costello from Britain's Newsroom.
That's what you get with this show. That's fantastic.
If it's happening, we're talking about it on Britain's Newsroom.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can